have all these people here for classification?
They're all excited to hear.
Already.
They're all excited to hear you, Jay. Good evening. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen, November 4, 2013. Will we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? We have our flag back. That's great. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, good evening. Stu Eggenberg chairing this evening. And first order of business is we have a hearing, tax classification hearing. So we will open that and love to hear from Jay and Tom. Floor is yours, gentlemen.
Thank you. As has always been the case, there are four basic votes that you need to take tonight, the first of which is an open space discount. We don't have any qualifying property in town, so we would recommend that you not adopt an open space discount.
You want to take these step by step?
Do we want to go through them all?
Separate votes would
One?
be,
Okay.
would be better.
Do we want to vote them as we go?
Well,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman, it being a public hearing, should we take the votes after the public
After the
hearing is
hearing?
closed?
Yes,
Okay.
I would, and we do have to ask the public if they have any comments.
Okay.
Too.
Why don't we run through the punch list and then we'll
Okay.
address the public.
Second will be a residential exemption, which essentially is a shifting of the tax burden from properties below the average property value to properties above the average property value. It's an exemption typically used in communities that have a lot of rental property or resort communities that have a lot of high-end property, maybe waterfront property, that type of thing. Once again, we would recommend that you not adopt this. The third vote we would ask you to take tonight is a small commercial exemption, which is an exemption for businesses of less than $1 million in value. It basically takes that exemption and shifts it to properties, commercial properties, which are valued at higher than $1 million. In our case, we have a very small number of properties, commercial properties to begin with, and we certainly have a very small number. I think there are only 14 that are above $1 million. So it would basically take a very large burden and shift it to those small number of properties. And for that reason, we would recommend that you not adopt the small commercial exemption as well. The final would be the classification of the tax rate. Typically, communities look at shifting some of the tax burden from the residential class to the commercial industrial class. It's generally done in a community that has a lot more commercial industrial property than we have. Based upon that, we would recommend that you adopt a factor of 1, which would keep the tax rate the same for all classes of property.
Is that it?
That's it.
All right, any comments from the public on this?
Don't be shy, this is an exciting topic.
All right, well, with that, yes.
Questions? I may.
Questions? Yep.
Yeah. On the small commercial, in that end of it, the town has been declared an economic target area, which you're probably aware of. So in the future, if something ever came forward to do any bargaining there, is there anything special that we need to pass to be able to do that in the future?
Well, you have 90 properties. You got 90 commercial industrial properties, 14 of them over $1 million, 76 are under $1 million.
Right, I read that.
Right, so you'd have to get about 30 or 40 more properties.
No, but I mean, the idea of that was to be able to negotiate with someone that would be bringing a new type of development into town, a commercial development.
Yeah, if it was over $1 million in value, every one of those properties that came into town.
So I guess my question is, would we have to pass something of this sort? Is there something special we need to do in the future to be able to do this bargaining?
If I may, yes, it's tax incentive financing,
Yeah.
but it's done with the state through their economic advisory boards.
But no, it's also done with the town. The town would
It's a mutual
also-
agreement that we would have to make with the state.
And the Board of Selectmen would be the negotiators, I believe. It would be up to the town at a town meeting to decide whether we wanted to do it. So
Yeah.
the question I'm asking, Phil, is in the future, do we need to have where we do this every year, pretty much routine, is there something that we need to think of for the future if this comes before us?
If I may, this particular exemption, it hits every property that falls below or above the $1 million. I think what you're getting at is if we had a specific
Yes,
property,
That's right.
which would be negotiated for that specific property, it would not fall under the
Under any
realm
of
of this small business exemption.
Okay.
And the state has tools and resources and some funding
Yeah.
available. So if we asked for some, if a business came in and said they wanted to try to negotiate some tax incentives on
Yes.
the state actually has some funds available to subsidize the taxes that we would
They would-
normally collect. It may be a shared commitment on both of our ends, but it is out there, and it's designed specifically for the economic designated areas.
So, just wanted to be sure we didn't have to do anything at this end, at a time like this. Well,
Are you gonna open a business up soon? You looking for something?
well,
Maybe, all right, that was a no.
remember,
That wasn't, no, you're right.
you have put me on that board, so I'm asking these questions.
We appreciate that. Any other comments?
Yeah, while they're here, it's not really anything to do with, I think, anything here, but we as a board have talked in the past about trying to come up with some type of release as a relief as our taxes go up and up for elders. And nothing has been done, so I thought that perhaps while this board is here, is perhaps we could make some type of plans to work jointly together in the future. We may not be able to develop anything, but I think that we owe an effort to see if anything is doable and reasonable for this town.
If I might shed a little light on that, Steve and I have the research, we have it in a folder, and taken a look at it. There are 2 other communities in the Commonwealth that have done some tax breaks for seniors. There's some requirements of income, length of residency, those types of things. So Steve and I have that on the agenda.
And we've seen stuff on here, but when do we put it on the agenda and not behind the scenes as,
Yep.
and
Still working on it.
And I'd rather see it worked on openly than as a
Well,
board.
we're just gathering
as a-
information.
Okay.
To bring to you
So,
guys, Steve and I.
But we've kicked it around for many years, so do you have any on your agenda screen of any
Well,
time?
you know, we got this to go through, we've been working on this,
I
so, you know,
understand it.
so, we're there, we'll get there. You know, maybe we can bring something for the next town meeting to consider, maybe.
Are the assessors gonna be involved?
I don't know,
Is one
well,
of the
as soon
things
as we
I'm
break out the
asking.
information, we'll certainly involve them, but we're not there yet, we're not ready to go public.
I mean, with that said, you know, we basically implement whatever town meeting approves. Somebody
We-
proposes at the town meeting, if
I
they
would-
approve it, then we would implement whatever exemptions are voted on. For instance, over the last several years, we've added a number of different participants to the senior work-off program.
Right.
Correct.
Right. We already,
Expanded that.
Which is,
Right,
we
which is
pushed
one
for
way,
that.
age is one of the qualifications to get into that,
Right.
that program, so.
I just think anything that we do going forward, we would want to work with your board.
I mean,
We
we're
need to know the
available whenever
impact
you-
on the rest of the town, the impact it's gonna have, if there was, and if we may not, just like many of these things that we're working on, we may end up saying it's just not a good fit also, without your opinion, so.
Actually, to make it real simple with these things, we can't do any of these.
With these here.
We couldn't.
No, I'm just, while we're having a public hearing, I just think it's a good time to bring it up and talk about it.
Your point's well taken, and we would reiterate that we're available whenever anybody needs us to get involved in a conversation.
Yeah, we'll talk to Steve and see if we can get that on another agenda.
Yes.
Thank you. Anything else on this topic?
just, what's the ratio of residential versus commercial, about 98-2?
It's 93 residential, 7%,
90.
6% commercial, 1% personal property.
Has that changed?
No. Like to split the rate, you have to have at least 15% commercial industrial, so we'd have to increase, we'd have to double.
Substantial, yeah.
Almost 3 times.
Yeah,
I am not advocating for
You'd have to
increasing taxes on
rezone
businesses.
so much stuff.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Any other
Change the whole
comments?
character of the town.
We have a question in the back. Can you state your name and address?
Paul Sadowski, 2 Paltry Way. I was just wondering, is the tax rate staying at $13.55, or is that going up? I didn't for the residential, for the new school, or how's that?
It's gonna increase, that's for sure.
It will increase at some point, gentlemen.
The tax rate is not affected this year by the school borrowing because it hasn't actually taken place.
Right.
The tax rate is increasing to $14.05 if these recommendations are followed here.
Yep.
But again, that doesn't include any borrowing for the school, which has not happened yet.
That'll kick in next year?
It'll kick
Depends
in
on when
December.
the-
Tax
When
bill.
you borrow it.
Yeah, when the bonds hit.
The 1405 is gonna kick in on the actual tax bill that'll be mailed out in December.
Yeah.
The reason why it's going up is the values went down 2%.
Okay,
So the values go down, the tax rate goes up.
yep. No, I remember you mentioned that before,
Yeah,
Jay.
not a lot, about 50 cents.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, in reference to that, Mike, have we any idea where we are in the borrowing, when it will start, and how it's gonna impact things yet?
To be determined.
We'll be borrowing probably in 2014. I don't know what, depends on our cash flow situation. We're gonna start spending at, $300,000-400,000 a month. And then in April, it's gonna kick up to about $1 million a month. So my guess, we'll probably go out to bond this winter and have it in place for April. Now, whether and we still, you as the board haven't determined yet if we're going to take it all at once or do it in
Phase it.
chunks.
Right.
We have the authorization to do it, but once we get the money, that's when we have to start paying interest on it too.
Mhm.
So, it'd probably be best to take it in several chunks. And it would not impact the rate as hard. Eventually, it'll all catch up to
Yeah, until we have
everybody.
to, until we start to pay them back
Right,
principal.
and,
which will
and
be when
once,
it's done.
once we borrow it, we don't have to start paying it back for another year. We have an interim interest payment
Right.
in 6 months. But the principal doesn't start getting paid back for a year after that. So if we go in 2014,
Probably 16 by
it
the time
really
we pay
won't
it back.
hit start hitting the tax rate until 15.
Mm.
And the full value won't hit until 16. And we'll already have been in the school almost a year. Because we're going in, the school will be complete in August of 15.
So in answer to the gentleman's question, he won't see a substantial tax increase until the school is occupied.
Yes.
Substantial.
Well, what do you consider substantial? So let's be, let's talk substantial for some people is not substantial for
Well-
others. So there will be an increase. I wouldn't say whether it's substantial or not. I wouldn't even go there.
We were talking about a $700 a year increase. That was back that's when the rate was at 11 something. Now the rate is at 14 something. So that impact, it will keep growing too.
Well, I know one of the things we kicked around a lot was the interest rates.
Yep.
And sometimes it's cheaper to take it all at once rather than wait, but we will get there, I guess.
Yeah, and that's one of the determining factors, absolutely.
That'll be up to us to structure it based on, what
What
we
the
have in
rates
front
are
of
at
us,
the
where we are
time.
with rates, and what the payback is,
Yep.
what the cost is. So I think that's, and not to interrupt, I think that's a discussion for another session. We're on tax classification hearing, not to cut it off, but I'm certain, we can certainly have that discussion when we talk about the school and any additional costs for remediation of our environmental issues, so.
Mhm.
But there'll be so many options for us to go over with bond council when we get here. We'll have that young guy that came, remember, and ran all the spreadsheets for us?
Yeah.
And all you guys freaked out, and I loved looking at it.
Dave was in his glory.
So,
Are you the numbers guy?
of course.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? No? All right, so we will close the hearing and we will take a vote. So,
Mr. Chair, I move to set an open space assessment.
Second.
all those in favor? All those opposed?
Nay.
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 Mr. Chair, I move to establish a residential exemption.
All those in favor?
I need a
No,
second.
second.
Oh, sorry.
I'll second that.
Thank you, David. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Mr. Chair, I move to accept the small commercial exemption.
Second.
All those in favor? All those opposed?
Nay.
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 Mr. Chair, I move to recommend a tax classification factor of 1.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Abstain? 4-0.
Okay. We're done.
And
Very good.
do we have one more or no?
No,
No,
that's the-
is that 4?
We're done.
I would ask that the sooner you can get the signatures on the votes that you've taken here, the quicker we can get the tax rate submitted. Which we'll do as early as tomorrow morning.
We've got it tonight, we'll sign it
We have an
tonight.
original, we'll get it to you.
Right.
first
We'll have it
thing
tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, have a great night.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Mr. Chairman, I move to close the public tax classification hearing.
We didn't vote to open it.
We didn't know, we
We
didn't
were
know.
advised that we didn't have to take a vote to open or close it.
Oh, okay,
Right,
great.
yep. All right, second order of business tonight is BP gas station 71 Main Street, Class 2 used car sales license. So come on up. Good evening. Please state your name and address for the record, if you would.
Sure, my name is Elizabeth Rose, I'm an attorney at 21 Elm Park in Groveland, Mass.
Fadi Isa, Groveland, Mass, 4 Holly Lane.
Thank you. All right, so this is for a license for Class 2 used car sales. Janet, everything in order here?
Yeah, there is some personal property taxes. Yes, we were told of today, and that will be part of negotiation with the lease to address that.
Okay.
Can you explain a little bit more detail? I caught a little bit of that.
There was some on the property, personal property taxes from 2013 and 2014 that have not been paid, about $240.
So it would be a condition for us to provide a permit. Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
Gentlemen, any questions?
Yeah, so what's the plan?
I'll briefly tell you, the plan, Mr. Fadi, or Mr. Isa has operated in Groveland for many years, and he has a Class 2 license there to sell vehicles. His plan is to, on the present site, have between 15 and 20 spaces. There is sufficient land for that to sell the Class 2 vehicles. He also plans to operate the gas pumps and do one-day service repairs.
Okay.
So it's gonna be a full-service gas station in addition to selling cars?
Correct.
Okay. My concern would be, what do you have for the signage at this point? You know, that's the corridor coming right into town, so I'm concerned about how that's gonna look in terms of, you know, are we gonna be using the banner signs that kinda, you know, fly in the wind there, or, I mean,
Will be no banners.
no banner signs?
Will be American flag on cars. This is part American flag, warranty, and the price.
Okay.
On each car that we have to put those 3 on the car.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's been my only concern, is that what's it gonna look like when you know, that's the,
No banners.
coming right into town, I just didn't wanna
Be
see
nice
it.
and neat.
Looks like the circus has arrived.
Not the
with all the
floating guy,
banners.
the long,
Yeah,
tall
yeah,
floating
yeah.
guy.
You know that guy that, did-
Only at Halloween and Christmas.
Only Halloween. Halloween, well, that's fine. There you go.
all right.
Any further questions from the board?
No, I'm happy that it's a full-service gas station.
Yeah, I'm glad to see you coming in.
Very, very happy. to
Thanks.
see
Wish you a
that.
lot of luck. That's
Yeah.
Thank you very
that's
much.
great. We're
I'll
very
make it look good. I
very
promise.
happy to
Yeah.
see somebody really want to take it
Appreciate
over.
that. I
Are
used
you
to own-
leasing the property or are you buying
Yeah,
it?
listen, I used to own a Getty by the bridge in Groveland.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
For 5 years.
Oh, okay, right in the corner?
Yes.
Yep.
Is it still there?
No, the building is.
Great
yes.
building is
Yeah.
good.
Right. Okay.
And my shop now at the Groveland Georgetown line on Route 97.
Ah,
Groveland Auto Repair and Sales, and we do state inspection. We sell cars and we do auto repair shop.
Yeah. The one just past 97 Pub 90
Before,
or
right
Golden
at the
Grounds
line.
or whatever.
Right, I'll get it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right at the line on top of the hill on the right side. If
Yeah.
you're going toward Joe.
Oh, right. Okay.
Groveland.
Yeah. Okay. Great. All right. Any further questions?
Mr. Issa, thank you for wanting to do business in Georgetown, and we wish you,
Yeah, lots of
everything
luck.
gets through
Thank you
and-
very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Excellent.
All right. So I entertain a motion
So this expires on December 31st, correct?
of
Right.
this year, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's conditional upon the personal property taxes being paid?
Yes, and they are required to get a $25,000 bond that's required by the state.
That's a state bond.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see, Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the application for the Class 2 used car sales permit with the condition that all personal property taxes are paid to Fadi Issa, operating the BP location as it is today, with a term to expire on December 31st, 2013.
Before we second, can we also add the requirement for the bond?
State requirement, but yes.
Yeah, that should be in the motion.
Sure.
If it hasn't
I'll add
already
it to
been,
my
hasn't been
motion then.
presented.
It's also conditioned upon the $25,000 bond that is required for the permit.
Definitely.
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right.
You are in business, sir.
Very good.
Thank you.
Welcome to town. Thank you. We're
Thank you
looking
so
forward
much.
to it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Well, I'll do that.
That.
Then have them sign.
Yeah.
All right, so we, next order of business, I'd like to kind of get Pembroke Elementary School and joint school committee meeting going. And that good with everybody? All right, why don't we have the school committee come on up and start your session and swear in and do your thing. The dual meeting. Yeah, they have to open their meeting. Yeah, come around and pull up some chairs and. You guys will have to open your meeting. So welcome to the school committee.
Thank
How are
you
you?
for having us.
Thanks for coming in.
Okay, well, the school committee will officially open up their meeting, joint meeting with the selectmen. So moved. I don't think we have.
Nope, we're good. Okay. So we have a joint school committee meeting with the Board of Selectmen tonight to talk about Pembroke Elementary School and an update on that. So whoever would like to give us an update on what's going on there. We've had some environmental studies done.
We did.
And we're anxious to hear from the gentleman from Wilcox and Barton, is it?
Yes.
Barton?
Yes.
Who's done the environmental studies.
That's correct.
And tell us what's going on.
All right, well, let me start by just talking a little bit about me and where I came from and who I brought with me, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks again for having us. As I said, my name's Russ Barton, and I'm one of the two principals at Wilcox and Barton. Bill Wilcox and I started the company in 2000. We primarily operate in New England and New York, and we do some traveling nationally for a few select clients. Most of our projects involve soil, groundwater, air, asbestos, lead, and other building-related hazardous materials. Some projects like this one will start right at the beginning. Others we might inherit somewhere along the way, so we're a pretty diverse group. We have a wide array of clients in the both public and the private sector. I'm a geologist with about 20 years of experience in the environmental field, and I brought three professionals with me tonight. Cindy Fuller. Cindy Fuller has over 22 years of experience in the environmental field with an expertise in management, performance, and review of human health and ecological risk assessments. She's a master's in public health and is recognized within the consulting community as an expert in her field. She's been with Wilcox and Barton since 2006. Prior to that, she worked for several other consulting companies and spent 4 years with the EPA. One of my other guests is Amy Roth. Amy is a licensed site professional for this project. She has over 18 years of experience in the environmental field. She's a senior geologist and a project manager at Wilcox and Barton. Amy manages a diverse portfolio of projects from initial development through successful completion and closure. Amy is a professional geologist in New Hampshire and a licensed site professional in the Commonwealth of Mass. She's been with Wilcox and Barton since 2010. Last, Tony Andronico. Tony has over 27 years of experience in the environmental field. Tony's also a licensed site professional, and he's worked with the Mass Contingency Plan since its inception in 1988. Tony's been a licensed site professional also since the inception of the program since 1993. Tony's an expert in all phases of environmental investigation and the remediation process, from sample collection to data validation to report writing. So let me tell you a little bit about how we ended up here. We started this process by doing a phase 1 environmental site assessment for the Pembroke Elementary School. The assessment was performed in accordance with the ASTM standard 1527-05. That process includes a site inspection, interviews with knowledgeable personnel, historical research, and a review of reasonably attainable public records, with the goal being to identify what's called recognized environmental conditions. Those recognized environmental conditions might represent a liability to an owner, a seller, or a lender. So after we got done with our phase 1 environmental site assessment, we had identified 3 recognized environmental conditions at the school. One of them was a heating oil tank. The heating oil tank services the furnace, which is also a gas-fired furnace, and the heating oil tank hadn't been used in quite some time. So the recommendation was to remove the heating oil tank as part of the construction phase. That's how that recognized environmental condition was going to be handled. The second 2 items are tied together from an assessment standpoint. The first one was the floor drain system. So within the school, there's a whole series of floor drains and slop sinks that are all connected to an underground system that discharges to the septic. The septic tank then discharges to the leach field. So the septic tank was considered part of the recognized environmental condition because there's a possibility that the septic tank itself was to release something to the environment. More likely was something going into the leach field and releasing to the environment that way. So that was one of the items that was identified that was going to require some supplemental investigation-related activities. The third one is the transformer. The transformer that's out there, the electrical transformer, was going to be removed as part of the construction. However, transformers being oil-filled and historically have had the presence of PCBs was another target for a supplemental investigation. So we designed a subsurface investigation program around those 2 major recognized environmental conditions, the floor drain system and the transformer. So the idea in terms of doing the subsurface investigation was to determine if there had been a significant release at the subject property, was there any regulatory requirements identified, and is further investigation beyond the original scope required. So on October 15th of this year, we did a subsurface investigation which included a series of test borings and the installation of 1 monitoring well. Test borings were done specifically around the septic tank and in the vicinity of the leach field. The scope work also included a shallow sampling program in the vicinity of the transformers, designed to identify any shallow contamination that may have been caused by some breach in the transformer. About a week later, we collected a groundwater sample from the 1 monitoring well that we were able to install. There's a high volume of ledge out there, bedrock, at very shallow depths. So the original scope was to put in more monitoring wells. Because of the shallow bedrock, we were only able to get in 1 monitoring well, and that went in in the vicinity of the leach field. The other borings that were done at the septic tank, we reached termination in the 2 to 5 foot range. Mostly in the 5 foot range. There was a number of tries. We determined that we were getting refusal up there, so we abandoned the idea of putting any monitoring wells up around the septic tank. The leach field, we were able to advance the drilling tools down to the 10 to 12 foot depth, where we were able to collect some deeper soil samples and install 1 monitoring well. On October 24th, we had evaluated the data, and the concentrations in the shallow soil samples and the deep soil samples had elevated concentrations of arsenic, cadmium, and chromium. As a result of those concentrations, we also activated the 2 shallow soil samples from around the transformer for the same analysis. Because the concentrations in the 2 to 4 interval up near the septic tank were elevated, there was the possibility that this contamination was at a shallower depth. And that's why we activated those shallow soil samples from around the transformer, to make the determination as to whether or not there was contamination consistent with the deeper samples at the 0 to 12 inch interval. 0 to 12 inches critical in this case because it represents a certain reporting criteria if the concentrations were to remain consistent. The highest concentration that we found was in the soil sample just under the pavement from a 2 to 4 foot depth in the vicinity of the septic tank. We did evaluate those concentrations. They did represent an initial reporting criteria, what's called a 120-day reporting criteria. But as I said, based on the proximity 2 to 4, 2 to 5, we had to evaluate whether or not the contamination was at a shallower depth. Shallower depth contamination, 0 to 12 inch, above the certain thresholds represents an imminent hazard, and we were evaluating whether or not we had an imminent hazard, at least in the vicinity of where we did our assessment. So on the 24th, we did, within a day of that, we had the concentrations back from around the transformer, and the concentrations were above the imminent hazard threshold. And as a result, we needed to notify the DEP within 2 hours. And we did that. Based on that finding, we established a shallow soil sampling program in the areas that were more accessible to the students. So we went on roughly a 75-foot grid out on the ball fields, on the playgrounds, and we did some minor sampling in the construction areas to see if the concentrations from around the transformer were consistent across the site. And what we found generally was that about 60% of the samples or thereabouts were also above the imminent hazard threshold out on the ball fields. Once we looked at the data holistically, we handed the data off to Cindy, who is the risk assessor, and there's a series of published standards and formulas that the data then gets inputted into, and with the primary goal being to determine, did the data holistically represent an imminent hazard, and did it represent a substantial risk to the students and the faculty? What we've determined based on those calculations is that there is no imminent hazard and there is no significant risk to the students. There is, however, significant risk over a long-term exposure to the faculty or someone that's been in the building for 20 years or more. I should say, along the way, as some of this information was coming to us, as you probably likely know, we did implement a cautious program of closing the ball fields, and since that time we've put the fencing up with demarcation to keep off the ball fields. We're currently implementing a program that is designed to take wood chips or mulch and cover up the exposed shallow soil areas, and we have stopped construction. That's where we are now. We're in the process of designing a supplemental subsurface investigation program so that we can better define the nature and the extent of the contamination that we've preliminarily identified in the shallow soil. Those concentrations that were out near the septic tank and the leach field are at deeper depths, so we will need to determine across the site at large, does the contamination extend to deeper depths, and is it consistent with what we found thus far? We'll also need to collect some more data in the vicinity of the construction zones so that we'll be more able to fine-tune a health and safety program and a soil management plan to allow construction activities to resume. That's where we are.
Russ, if I can interject, I think the phrase contamination might be a bit misleading. You might want to touch on the source, or our expectation what the likely source is.
Okay, so that's good. We do not know exactly what the source is. We're starting to lean towards the possibility that it may be naturally occurring. It does represent a risk that'll have to be managed, but if it's naturally occurring, it does give us some more flexibility within the boundaries of the regulations to make decisions, technical decisions around how to handle it.
Any questions?
I certainly have some questions. Being on the school building committee, this was never an issue. I just got off the school building committee, 3 or 4 months ago. So this is the first we're really hearing of this. I have some specific questions. Obviously, you did phase 1. When was phase 1 done? Time frame.
Phase 1 was done in December of 2011.
Okay. And that phase 1 did call for additional testing.
Phase 1 identified the recognized environmental conditions, right?
So it took us all that time to get to this point. How did that happen? And that's probably not your, not your answer, but I want some answers. I'd like to know, we hire an OPM, we pay all this money, we hire architects, get all these experts working on this, and now we're, ready to put a shovel in the ground, and the project stops. I mean, when was this when were we supposed to know about this? Who dropped the ball? That's, I'm looking for who dropped the ball. Anybody want to address that, Kyle, or?
Well, I could say that ultimately, since we were the ones who got them going again, you could say we have some responsibility in that regard. The phase 1 requirement is part of the whole process because this project is publicly funded. So it's an MSBA requirement.
Right.
And so that's why we did it before the schematic design phase, and it was part of the scope and budget agreement with the state. After that point in time, the additional investigation was not specifically called out in the phase 1 as to what was needed. There were 3 recognizable, what do they call it, environmental conditions pointed out, and at some point before construction would happen there, further investigation was needed. But what they pointed to, as Russ said, was a transformer that might have PCBs, a septic tank, and a septic field. And those were the areas that we knew we'd be disturbing during construction. We obviously had no idea that anything in the fields, that's not even part of the construction project, that any investigation was needed there. And so it wasn't a thought on anyone's mind at the time to investigate the fields. We did investigate, at the soils next to the septic tank, the septic field, at this time during construction. So
I'll put a however in there. However, if this was done timely, that would have led us, just like it has led us now, to the other issues.
Let me ask you a different question.
Well, hold on, let me
Are we
get
on
my...
time? Is this, are we on time, on schedule with the second phase? Forget about the actual results, but are we on time with the second phase? Would you normally have done it at this time?
The testing, you mean?
Yeah.
That schedule?
Yeah.
Typically, it is done as part of the, prior to construction happening.
I would say so.
So we're behind in that sense, Phil.
Right. So to me, if we got a report that said, look, you need to do additional testing that was done, that information was relayed to the experts in December of 2011. We are now in, where were we? November of 2000, wherever we are, 13. I just can't believe that this is where we are. Because if we had known about this, we would have slowed things down a little bit. We would have thought about, whether we needed to even put the school on that site. I just can't believe that we hired all these experts, pay all this money, and where we are right now. I'm just not happy about it. I think it's an embarrassment. It is. It's an embarrassment. And again, I won't get any further on that. The question I have specific to the individual contaminants, arsenic, you said cadmium and chromium?
Cadmium and chromium.
Okay.
Correct.
I mean, I'm an accountant, I'm not a chemist, but those aren't naturally occurring from a transformer, right? Those don't come, they don't put that stuff in a transformer, right? I mean, do I have that right at least?
That's correct.
Okay. So the contamination, let's get that straight, is not from the transformer. It's not from the oil tank, because those are not the chemicals that would be in the ground as a result of those being the problem, right?
Arsenic in particular is linked to a geologic unit, so bedrock
Right.
that runs in this area. So when we talk about naturally occurring, we're talking about breakdown products from bedrock.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, now that I got my disappointment out, for me, it's where do we go from here?
So there's two buckets here that we're gonna talk about. One is the environmental issue, the second is the impact on what that means for the town and the school project. Let's go back to the environmental impact for a second. So, how do you think this could play out? Give me the options on what you suspect could happen from a timing standpoint, from a remediation standpoint, from an investment standpoint. I'm just trying to get a sense, and I know you don't have the specific answers, but I'd like to know what the worst case scenario is, the best case scenario. Typically it falls somewhere in the middle. Maybe you can help us understand that.
Let me talk about the construction first, because I think that personally, I think that's a little bit easier to talk about. So with respect to the construction, our intention would be to develop a health and safety plan and a soil management plan to protect both the students and the faculty and the workers. So establish a program that allows them to continue with the construction while managing dust. The major driver here is dust. Chromium and cadmium, by the way, have kind of fallen off the list a little bit. The driver for this is arsenic. So the program would be designed to mitigate the dust. If we can do that, then, and manage the soil as it's being moved around on site during construction, then I think we can have a largely successful construction phase. We've talked at length about trying to manage the dirt as it's being moved around, because one of the big goals is separation, creating separation between the arsenic and anyone at a shallower depth. So the goal is separation, either by clean material above it, paving, a building, a synthetic ball field. Any of those options are available. The goal is separation. So I think we can implement a plan that would allow us to move forward with that. With regards to the other areas of the site, a little bit more challenging, because creating that separation is more difficult, because you don't have the flexibility of reestablishing grades, elevations. So I don't have a specific answer right now about that one, but we're certainly, trying to come up with some ideas. If it's determined that it is consistent with some natural occurring event, that also gives us some more flexibility to try to be creative in terms of how to create that separation. So that's what we're hoping. The data that we'd like to collect, the schedule now is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. Supplemental soil sampling data hopefully will help us with that investigation, because typically you'd expect arsenic to be at a shallower depth if it was, for example, used as in a pesticide,
right,
or some improper application. You wouldn't expect it to get worse as you got deeper.
And it's
You'd
worse
expect-
deep, right?
Right now,
We don't know
so
that.
far, based on a limited data set, yes, we do have deeper concentrations higher at deeper depths.
Okay.
So what we have so far are 4 deeper borings, so we have some stratigraphy there, and we have 31 shallow samples. So our immediate focus was obviously to figure out what the exposure is for the kiddos and the teachers and staff who are there. Now we need to go and really understand across those whole areas if indeed we get higher concentrations with depth. Best case scenario would be we don't find it at depth anywhere else. I think that's very unlikely. Worst case scenario is that we're going to consistently see higher concentrations, significantly higher concentrations with depth in the ball fields in the construction area.
So let's assume you don't find anything for the moment, and it is what you've found everything that you need to find, and you are putting your health and safety management plan together for that. So you talked about 3 options. You talked about paving it. So what's it? I think you should maybe describe where these locations are on the property.
Sure. I don't have a display of a site plan or anything, but
Yeah, that's fine.
The focus was the 2 baseball diamonds
On the first,
on the way in.
Yeah, first field on the left.
Right, and then we worked our way down to the second baseball diamond.
Sure.
And in the direction of the 2 playground areas
Okay.
and the basketball courts. And then we worked our way back around in the general area where we started. We collected some shallow soil samples along the perimeter of the parking lot and a few shallow soils in the area between the septic tank and the leach field.
Okay.
So that's where we've looked. Now there's definitely some larger tracks within the construction areas that we haven't looked at.
That's part of the plan. Is
that
to
would be
assess
part of
those.
the next phase of looking.
Okay. So, given that you don't find anything else anywhere else for the moment, paving it, paving the ball fields.
If we didn't find anything else and we only had contamination in the top foot, we'd probably get rid of it.
Just remove the soil.
Right.
Gotcha.
A 1 foot peel back is not a difficult or costly.
In the entire, give me the scope of the entire fields.
Yeah, there wasn't really any kind of distribution where it was, a pattern to it where it was higher over here, and it was consistent throughout, varying concentrations, so there really isn't a way to target a particular area for removal here, removal there. It's fairly random.
So you'd have to remove the top soil of the 2 fields up front, the bottom softball field, and the playground areas where, and the parking lot where the basketball court is.
Yes. Or
That's the
or,
best news?
Or or add on top of it.
Or cap it.
Cap it. Create separation.
Okay. The other alternative was to put a building on it, you said.
Well, yeah, when we talk about barriers to exposure, yeah, a lot of different options exist, layer of gravel, layers of fill, paving, if you were putting a building somewhere.
Gotcha.
Building over. So any barrier to exposure.
Yeah, there could be landscaping, the playing fields can be designed partially as a barrier itself, so you could have a regular playing field that you would typically see, but it would be serving as a barrier underneath, so it's not like you're gonna pave it or not have any use of the land. There are a lot of different ways to get to that cover that's necessary without really impacting the use of the land or preventing the use of the land.
Your last option was something like an artificial ball field, which took 10 years to get the one we're looking at right now.
I just had an experience where we did do one, so it was considered a viable option. So.
I'm not going to throw that off the table just yet because we are looking at our official field. Okay, so help me understand what the is this. Give me the scope of this project for a second. If the best case scenario is looking at we cap it or remove the soil, time frame, costs, any ideas what those are? We're talking several hundred yards of land. And in your experience, are we looking at a $500,000 project or a $5 million project, or am I way off base?
Well,
I'm not going to. This is just give ballpark it here. Help me understand. Worst case, best case. Just help us in our planning.
I think that there's certainly a cost implication. Again, I'll talk about the construction because I guess that's just easier, at least initially.
Yeah.
To have the plans in place is a relatively minor cost. $10,000 at most to have the plans in place, if not less. But then to have someone on site to monitor during construction, I mean, you're talking about $1,200 a day type of thing.
So the plan's in place.
Yeah.
You mean the execution of the plan?
He's talking about.
Preparing the plans.
Got that.
And then implementing the plans with the contractor.
Okay.
Right? That would be how you would get the construction phase moving.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the additional cost of what it would cost to cap it or to remove it.
He's in the construction area.
Right, well, in the, what we're again, we're talking strategy about when there's a lot of cut and filling going on, and I've talked with Carl a little bit about, in some cases you're removing 8 feet, or maybe you're filling 8 feet because of the different changes in topography. So creating the always having in mind that you're trying to create that separation, without knowing specifically, I think it's a net you're bringing material in at the end of the day, at least in the construction zone. So the goal would obviously be to move the soil strategically so that when you're building it back up to meet your final grades, that you've got something in mind, in place.
The barrier.
To have that
Clean
cap,
fill.
the barrier, the clean fill. You're moving material so that it'll be under the parking lot. All of those strategies can come into play as it relates to the construction. Now, obviously, there's a cost for the contractor because he probably won't be able to just, drive straight ahead, so to speak, all the time. He'll have to kind of tolerate our move it here, move it there.
So $1,200 a day for the duration of the project?
For the sake of argument, yes. Once they stop doing earthwork, no, then we wouldn't need to be on site. If they were just building the building, building the school, there's no soil activities taking place, there's no monitoring going on.
So if this is a half-a-year project to do all the moving of all the earth that needs to be done, then we're looking at a half-year cost of $1,200 a day plus the plan itself, and so it's
And
not.
there's going to be unfortunately, there's going to be other incidental costs along the way. You're writing reports, you're managing data because you'll be collecting data along the way, and that's kind of not knowing if it's going to be in the DEP system or not officially is a little bit of a variable, because when you start writing reports somewhat frequently to the DEP, there's an office cost associated with that.
Okay, so let's
clarification.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think you started off on the ball fields.
Yeah.
But we moved to construction, correct?
Well, I
hope that we are gonna get, because I think your concern right now might be immediate with what's going on there by the ball fields. I wanna make sure that we are gonna get back to that and not get lost in
I'm
construction.
talking the best case scenario for a second here, right? So I'm just trying, what is the best case scenario? The best case scenario that this is maybe a couple $100,000 problem for us.
That's probably the best case.
Right? And the time, how does this, then the other thing is there an impact in time in actually constructing the project plan? What's that impact in time mean to the construction plan? I don't need money, I just need time for the moment.
If I could just chime in, actually, the conversation's a little premature because I spoke to the contractor tonight. We've been trying to keep some level of communication between us and the contractor because he's been very aggressive, he's really getting ready to move, and he wants to get moving fairly quickly to try and beat some of the weather. He's very anxious to see the plan. And before we could comment on what the anticipated delay or what the anticipated cost would be, you really need to see the plan. What is the plan gonna be? How intrusive is it gonna be on, we have about 35,000 yards of dirt to move around on the site.
I just want the best case scenario.
So what we have to do is, at this point, I really couldn't tell you because again, like I said, if this involves, looking at the productivity and the whole bit, it's impossible at this point to state. We really need to look at that plan.
Thank you. Rob, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to clarify what you were talking about with regards to cost, that I suspect the biggest cost of all of this is, I don't think we're talking about, which is what Pat's alluding to. And the biggest cost.
Construction delays and.
Construction delays, anytime you revise drawings, you have additional service, and then Pat could correct me on this, but there's, if I'm not mistaken, because this is all site work, it's gonna be on the town's dime? Is that correct? So all this site work is on the town's dime. This isn't a 48% reimbursement.
We're way over our
I know we are.
reimbursement.
I know we are. That's why I'm saying that.
Yeah, so there's a couple things here. One is, let's assume the school's not being built for a second. Let's pretend this project never existed. Let's just talk about remediation of what's there right now. Then the second part is, what's the impact to the school, right? So go through your plan again in terms of timeframes here. So by mid-next week, you're gonna have a health and safety plan drafted for DEP?
Right. What we've talked about even as early as today was to try to get the plans even drafted up in a draft format so that we can get them to the contractors so they can start thinking about how this affects their overall strategy. So that'll happen probably within the next couple days, would be the goal for that.
Okay.
We have a big open hole right now with regards to the DEP, because when we notified them on the 24th, we haven't had any real good conversations with them since.
Yeah.
Several calls. They assigned it to a case manager. We don't know who that case manager is. And the big question is, do they want to see the plan before they give us verbal approval to proceed with the plan? And if that's the case, then there's a 21-day waiting period, up to a 21-day waiting period before we could implement the plan. If we can get them and they cooperate and we can get them the plan and they could review the plan, we may be able to back off on that timeline. But that would be a scenario that we may not have complete control over, is do we have to wait the 21 days?
Right.
If that's the case, then no matter how good the plan is or how quick we are with the plan, they're still not going to give us the okay, and they wouldn't even need to give us the okay because 21 days had passed and then you can implement.
Right.
So that's a big question that we need to have answered, and obviously we're working pretty hard to try to get that one answered. Now, if they give us the okay, we're also talking about just sending them the plan in hopes that by having it in front of them, they activate more or act more responsibly and give us some direction and allow us to move forward. And so the plans, sorry, Les, I mean, realistically, to think that the plans will be done and submitted, within the next week is very reasonable.
So in parallel, you said that you're gonna be doing additional testing.
Yes.
Right? And if anything comes about that additional testing, so you're doing deep bore testing in the spots that we just discussed, right? And that's part of your next.
Really across,
Yeah.
we'll be looking everywhere.
Across the fields and everything, or even in the new construction site? Both. Okay.
Can I just
Pam?
ask, the plan that you're talking about and the cost of the plan, that'll be affected by any kind of the cause of these chemicals of arsenic? Do we know? I mean, you said that it could be naturally occurring. And if it is naturally occurring, have you looked at the chemical compositions of our drinking water, our water, and would you consider testing somewhere else in town? Maybe, I mean, we have a lot of fields in town. This is just, I mean, I don't know, but I would think that a lot of what we wanna do would be determined by, is this something that's just endemic to this area? Or,
That's a great question, and that's a big question.
Okay.
Yeah. I can tell you that the one water sample that we collected from our well was, there wasn't any concentrations above the standards in it. One well, one sample. I don't know right off, do we know, what's the water source in town? It's all.
It's Parker River Basin.
So, I mean, that's
So
the
what-
water
It's a well
at
that
the
wells.
school.
Upstream a bit.
Right, I mean, they're not getting the water for the school right on the property, it's pumped in. So
Yeah.
again, that's a big question about something that's not specific just to Pembroke, it may be, more townwide.
If I can just interrupt, there are also drinking water standards for arsenic in particular that the town has to meet in their treatment system. So if there were anything that were showing up above a standard, they would need to respond immediately and report it as as
and you would know that?
Yes,
You
they're
would be-
required,
okay.
to
We
release
would
it.
know.
Yeah, we definitely know that.
I think,
But I mean, if it's filtered out, it's one thing if it's naturally occurring and then we filter it out and then it's fine for us to drink. But I don't know if it's occurring and if it's something that the treatment systems, just make the water all right for us.
So can I just stress two things here? One, and just for the public's sake, your assessment today is that it is not an imminent threat for children who are
are on school grounds right now. The threat level is for folks who have long-term exposure to those fields. So it's more the staff and faculty and maintenance and ground crews and stuff like that. Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
So we have a limited data set, and that I have to caveat that because we are going to collect some more samples, but definitely based on what we have, that's the accurate statement.
Is there anything else I mean, there's a lot of unknowns right now, so we're speculating on a lot of different things here. Your tests may come back negative for elevated levels in these deep borings, which would mean, given what we've got today, this is what we've got to address. And this is the best case scenario. And we talked about the cost of the remediation. So we talked about your services. We didn't talk about what the cost is to move the dirt around if there's additional cost. I would suspect that that's not very inexpensive, especially if we have to bring in fill, or not. I suspect that that's, I don't know how much that would cost, but given today, I don't know if anyone has any expertise to be able to say what that cost would be. In your experience, that size of a thing, given your knowledge of the project or lack of, what are we talking about for costs in terms of either capping or remediating that size of just what we've got today? I mean, any ideas?
I don't.
We haven't really done the calculations.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer.
If
I
I
don't
had
have
to
a great
guess,
answer.
I would suggest the range that you offered at the beginning was probably not too out of whack.
500,000 to 5 million?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is just, without any calculations whatsoever, just a general feel is something.
Best case scenario, $500,000 to do it. Worst case scenario, 5 million.
And
I'm not.
maybe that's shifted a little bit,
We don't know yet.
down. That might be a little on the high side. The best case might be a little lower, and even worst case might be a little lower, but that's not way out of whack.
This is just helping setting expectations here. Okay.
Our initial focus obviously was exposure and the current situation, what are the kids, dealing with in their day to day. So secondary concerns now are figuring out how this impacts the construction project.
Right. For the folks in the audience who are here from the public, if you could just hold your questions so we can have our discussion as a board, just table them, we'll get back to you. We just want to make sure we address it here first, and sorry to speak for you, but I know people want to speak out there. Okay, so we have no idea in terms of how this impacts the scope of the project in terms of time and budget for the moment. Is that what you guys are saying? Or given the scenario that you see in front of us, what would your best guesstimate be? How does this impact the project?
Well, again, like I said, since you're looking in this direction, I think, like I said before, we'd be in a much better position after we see what this plan is gonna be to be able to assess where we are. I think Rob's point is a good point. When you look at the construction project, and I would separate that for a moment, not that it's more important than obviously the conditions on the existing site, which is probably more concern to parents and students and staff. But with regard to the construction project, what you have is the delay issue and the extended time performance for the contractor. You have the procedural issues on the site, depending on what the plan indicates as to how we have to handle material on site and what it means to its productivity. When you get into a delay situation, he's made certain commitments with certain subcontractors to come in who are available now. If he loses them now because they're not available now, and he's gonna go to somebody else, that could be a cost. So there are a number of issues. How long will the delay be? How quickly can he mobilize? What are the conditions that he's gonna be dealing with on site? How do we handle the materials? The cost of monitoring is a concern, because the cost of monitoring, if someone's gonna be there full-time during the earth operations, there will be times when there'll be no earth operations going on, but there'll be trucks running around the site creating some dust. Do we need someone full-time? We'll need to talk about that. So there's a lot of things here that it's difficult to speculate. When you say best case would be we find everything's negative, we've lost some time, and it costs $100,000 and we move on and then address what's happening on the existing site. But again, so much is in the balance on where we are and when we're gonna get this plan and what the impact's gonna be as it relates to schedule, cost, and procedures.
We're putting you on the spot for some answers that people, we all want to know. So what do we think given if we find nothing in our deeper well borings, what's the best case in terms of time frame that we can get back on track? And what's the worst case that you think you see ahead of us? You talked about 21 days after the plan's submitted.
and we're not sure from then when you can actually execute the plan. But in your experience, I know every situation's different, but give me a maximum and a minimum where you think that we can actually get back to construction. Assuming that nothing else is found there, and we have the health and safety plan, it's 21 days later that the state has approved it by then, which is the max, you said, right? And help me get a sense of,
It's been our experience that, you know, the initial management of the plan, obviously, you kind of get off the ground a little slow because, you know, you're trying to implement the plan. We have to implement the plan. So it starts off a little bit slow, but once the contractors kind of hit their stride a little bit and figure out that, you know, when the truck's coming in, they know when the truck's gonna come in, you know, it's all about keeping down the dust. And the simple answer is, if you can see it, then you need to get rid of it.
right.
So as long as that, everybody's on the same team, we're all trying to keep the dust down, it starts off a little shaky, you know, usually within a couple weeks, they've got a system down that allows them to comply with the plan. People that are coming on and coming off the site know what they need to do, all the certifications have been worked out so that people have the right documentation, and they go. Now, there's gonna obviously be a challenge that we're gonna work closely with the cut and fill calculations, because even though let's say they find nothing else, some portion of the site still have these levels. We're still responsible for worker safety, so there's still gonna be an implementation aspect of the plan, and the goal will still be separation. So trying to create that separation as the whole thing comes together is gonna be huge.
So let me separate.
It's not necessarily gonna be 21 days though, Phil.
Well, let me just add, I think you get that really, there's two separate things we have to do. The first part is diagnosis, which we're still in that process, and then the second part is the cure.
Sure.
So once we finish the assessment, we have a good handle on it, then we can start working with the contractor and the designers and looking at, where do we do the cuts, where do we do the fill, how much is it gonna cost, what are our options? So that process takes a little time in and of itself. So, before we really have a good handle on saying, here's where we're gonna move stuff, we're probably a good 4 weeks away before we have that answer.
So, if you separate the school project for a moment here, I'm glad we found this issue. I mean, it's forget about the school project. This is, there's an imminent health hazard to our staff and at work at the school. And
There's a long-term risk, not an imminent hazard to the workers, if they're exposed for a long period of time.
thanks for clarifying that. So something needs to be done on the site there. So, so there's a cost. That cost is going to be borne one way or the other, whether we were building a school or not building a school, right? And there's actually potential some economies of scale if we're using our own fill and moving and stuff like that. So it may not be as, it may be on that end. Now, the impact of the school, any delays on that could certainly outweigh any type of savings we get from that, got that point. But, so we're glad we're at this situation where we understand that there's an issue and that we're addressing that. As far as Dave's concerned, I can't understand how, when we're going for financing for this, that we're a month away or less to go in terms of starting to get financing conditional upon a clean property. It's a travesty. I used to do commercial real estate, and I will tell you that understanding that we're doing it this late stage is mystifying, to be quite frank with you, and I am disappointed that this did not get done. So I'm going to relate that back to the school committee, more the school building committee. Would something of like this, we had voted not to go through our planning process in town. We voted, and my question on that, and I don't know who's here to answer that, if any of us can. We voted to bypass the typical approval process of a commercial project in town, and could have this been caught much earlier? Bob, maybe you can answer that.
As past chairman of the planning board and very familiar with the process, typically what would happen in the process is if an environmental one assessment had been put in place and identified potential areas, it's not unusual for, and in fact, when I was chair, we had 2 projects that came before us that before approval was granted, the environmental 2 was performed so that they knew and we knew what was required for that approval.
Gotcha. I'll stop. I'll give you guys the floor.
Can I ask? I'm concerned that we're separating the construction zone from the fields. Because for me, I wouldn't build a school if we don't get the fields. If the fields, for some hypothetical reason, cost us $5 million to cap, what good is the school there? You know, that's why I'm so upset that we didn't get this information while we're at design phase, knowing that this could be a possibility, because maybe we would not have supported putting that school on that site. So I'm, you know, please don't separate. Well, we're going to deal with this. We're going to have a plan for the construction side of it and all that. You got to be concerned about those fields too, because this is one big project. I don't start slicing it and dicing it for me, because then you know, it's really going to make it an issue. You know, the school without the whole piece in the woods, the whole thing that we wanted. You know, Rob and I, and we were on that committee and talked a lot about, you know, overall project and how well it was going to work with the fields. Now, what good is the school if the kids can't play on the fields? What good is the school if you can't play in the playground because they're contaminated?
Well, they're gonna be capped.
I understand that, Phil, but my point is, at what cost?
Either
You know?
way, they have to be, whether the school project was gonna happen or
the
not.
point is, we maybe not would have said, let's find another spot to put the school.
You're
if we
right.
knew we had this information. That's why I still say, you know, you said it's a travesty. You know, I say it's unacceptable. But, again.
Can I get one question in here? Just, actually not a question, maybe a demand. I'd like somebody here to get a copy of me of that past site review done in December 11, so I could take a look at it as to where we were supposed to go.
We should get it online. I think it should be part of
I don't want to
should be
go digging
online.
for it. I
No,
want
should be
somebody
online.
here that's getting
Right.
paid to
It
get
should
it
be
to
online
me
too for the
in
public,
a hard
Gary.
copy that I can
I'm
read.
supporting you. I'm not disagreeing.
I agree.
It should be part. We've been posting everything else on the school building
Yeah.
site. It should be
That's
posted
the whole
electronically.
thing
people to
for
see.
what we're dealing with right here.
Right.
That's the
That's the
2011.
That's the phase
Not
one.
the whole thing. This is to deal with what this group
Yeah,
did.
that's the only document.
No, that's the
been
phase
prepared.
one.
That's the executives.
That's all that we have.
But I mean, this is what you
That's-
gave us.
That's the one document that's been prepared. Everything else
Okay.
that we've done
And I
since
can
is
see
still
I-
in the
Can we
draft
can we
phase.
have it electronically and put out there for the public to see?
I've
Put
got
it on
it.
the school building.
How quickly
sorry?
would you,
I have it.
how quickly
so
would
we're gonna
you
put it up on
expect
the
a
site?
phase two to be done after you
if
submitted
it'll
this
fit.
phase one in a project like this?
186
Just kind of
pages.
curious.
What would be the typical
There are,
time?
there are a few variables. I mean, a lot of the times the phase two sit while they evaluate funding. Sometimes projects don't happen because of the identified items in the phase one. So there is a very real possibility of delays after the phase one while you evaluate those recognized environmental conditions relative to the cost. So there are some, it usually doesn't happen the next day.
Right, got that.
And, you know, it
Not 2
could-
years later.
the circumstances,
It had-
sometimes it does, and it's only because the circumstances are such that, you know, maybe the financing is pulled and there's another person that comes involved. Phase ones are viable for 180 days. Technically, after
Right.
that point, you're supposed to do them again or update them.
So timeline. Phase one was done in 11.
December of 11.
December of 11. Pat, why are we 2 years later getting into this phase two? Why were we not in the 180-day window of doing phase two? Where did that come off the train track?
I'll just give you what our involvement. The proposal to do the phase two came in January of 12.
Okay.
When it came in, it was distributed. There was a transmittal from DRA, and it was distributed. There were four prices in there. 2 prices were to prepare bid documents and so forth. One was to monitor the removal of the oil tank, and then there was a $27,000 or $28,000 site investigation. We questioned all the 3 top items.
Mhm.
The last one, obviously, was the monitoring of the oil tank when it came out. The first one was the testing, and we weren't really sure what that was, because as far as we were concerned, that phase two, where it identified the 3 risk areas, and they were the leaching field, the transformer, and the items associated with that. They seem to be localized areas, understanding that there could be PCBs, there could be some oil that leaked out of the tank. Never I mean, I've done schools for 50 years. We've never, I mean, I've worked in the city of Woburn. It's probably the most environmentally sensitive community in Massachusetts. We've done 11 projects there. We've gone through the phase 1 site assessment. There's never been any issues down there, other than did the old tank leak a little bit here? Were there any PCBs there? And then you address those in the bid documents. When this came in, those 3 questions were posed back to DRA, because obviously they're consultants of DRA. We said 2 of these items appear to be design items, should be part of the design aspect of it. And with testing, we're confused because we're looking to find out whether we've got a little more leakage around the oil tanks, or whether there's some PCBs around the transformer pad. The discussion with Paul Brown at the time, who was there, the discussion basically centered around the items are actually, we're gonna be reviewing that. Those design items should be incorporated. We're gonna be soliciting a revised proposal. But in the meantime, we're gonna get all this, whatever we need to get the documents done, we're gonna get them done. And they were. The documents now are complete. They have oil remediation. They have unit prices for some of the items that you might run across, although right now there's no quantities. It's anticipated there were none, but if there were, there's unit prices to remove those things. So there were very localized assessments to be done. Again, like at that point, things were proceeding. The work was going to be done. It was going to be inputted into the documents, and at some point there would be a proposal coming out to get the phase 2 site assessment done. At some point, recently, back in September, though a lot of the work had been done to get the design documents done and ready for bid, it was obvious that that testing part of it hadn't get done, so it was immediately scrambled, and the price came down considerably. The 27 went to 21, the 2 design items got removed, and then the monitoring of the oil tank removal was still set out, so that won't be done, like I said, for a period of time. But the critical components to get the documents done were complete. With the testing to identify these localized conditions, we're going to be done just to look at where did, if there was any leakage, where did the oil plume go, were there any PCBs, which there were not. And it was really a localized situation, which is pretty much standard. You would probably find that you had a little bit more in those areas. Never thinking that this was going to expand to having these levels of potential contaminants up so close to the surface on a site that was about as virgin as you could get in our experience. I mean, we did that school back in 1970, looked just like the site that you're going to be building on now. So there was no evidence that there was anything happening there. So it looked like a very localized situation. So the idea was, get us a revised proposal, and then we can move on the revised proposal. Well, the revised proposal came in September or so, whatever it was, reduced to obviously remove the items that should have been part of the design, and we're going to identify those localized situations in those 3 areas.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I might, that's a long answer to a yes or no question. Does the phase 1 call for a phase 2 assessment to be done?
It
Yes or no?
recommends it, yes.
Thank you. And did it mention a time frame?
Did not mention a time frame.
But normal.
What would be
are,
typical?
Let me normal best practices. What's the time frame?
It would be advisable to get it done before you finish the documents.
Which documents?
The bid documents, yes.
Okay.
Which were done in September?
It
Well,
was done
August.
in July.
Right.
July.
Yeah.
So in phase 1, was there any indication of the fields issue?
No indication, no reason to suspect metals.
Okay. So then how did we get to the fields specifically? How do we come
Scope
across the
expanded when you
fields?
found some arsenic locally,
As
right?
soon as we found the arsenic at shallower depths, 2 to 4, 2 to 5.
In around the tanks?
In and around the septic tank. It was at a shallow enough depth that we activated the samples around the transformer, which is the only soil samples that we had at that shallow depth.
Right, okay.
And so we activated those. One of the 2 samples came in above the imminent threshold hazard. Imminent threshold, sorry.
Right.
And that, that was a Friday, and we sampled the ball fields on Monday.
When you found that, does that increase the scope immediately based on the rules and regulations by public,
What it does is
DEP.
elevate it to a Mass DEP issue.
There you go.
Okay.
And that's what required us to go out into expand the scope and test it.
We already planned, actually, to
Right.
sample the fields as soon as we saw that there was arsenic.
Which is the prudent thing to
shallow
do.
soil.
Mhm.
We put that in place immediately, and then we got the results on the shallow sample 24 hours later. found out that we did have an issue, we called DEP that night, Friday night, we were sampling on Monday.
And they recommended
So-
we close the fields and we did that
Which is
that night.
protocol, pretty much.
So, the arsenic that's detected, you're saying is deeper.
The highest
Higher
concentration-
concentrations are deeper.
That's correct.
So that would tend to indicate that it's coming from bedrock
Suggests a natural source is definitely possible, industrial sources.
decomposing and things like
Right
that.
on the top.
Okay. So if we were to remediate this, is that what we, yeah, to, you were talking about taking soil off. Why would we take soil off if it's deeper?
That was the best case scenario, that we didn't find it at depth in the ball field
Gotcha,
area. So
okay.
if we only had this thin little top coat of
Yep.
problem soils.
Then you would
peel them off.
remediate, right?
Yep.
Okay.
But that won't probably be appropriate.
Okay. We didn't talk about scenario 2 really. What we talked about best case. What would be a moderate scenario? In this case, are we having to put more fill on top of it on the fields? What's the minimum
Well,
depth? A foot?
Being that the goal is separation,
Mhm.
the big challenge is gonna be the existing ball fields, because the grades are set.
Mhm.
There's not a lot of flexibility, and it's in the top 12 inches.
Mhm.
So it's gonna be very strategic in terms of how we,
So we're talking about taking fill from the construction site. Not at all? Bringing in completely
Not if the
separate fill?
construction site is consistent with what we said.
Right, no, if it's, understood that, but assuming that we go into the woods and it's not,
Nothing.
and we're not finding any issues there, we could then use fill, and we need, what, a foot minimum to cover this for separation in the fields?
we have 2 to 3
I would say
feet,
2 feet.
2 to 3 feet typically.
It depends
if
on how it's engineered.
Mhm.
It might be
Engineering
less.
gives us some flexibility.
Okay.
We need a big sign that says wanted clean fill.
Yeah, worst case?
What's the worst case?
Well,
The
worst
worst
case-
cases would be is that you'd have to rework the entire graded area and bring in clean fill to build that separation.
Okay.
Or you get rid of it and find a disposal option for it, which is costly, and then you bring in clean material and replace it.
Okay. All right, Rob, you have a question?
Yeah, I had several items. My son Jason asked me, he's at Pembroke, he goes, when can I go outside again? And I'm still not clear on just a rough idea of when that might be, and can I get some clarity around that? Just when roughly might kids be able to go back outside and play?
Are you saying outside to play or outside on the fields?
Outside in the fields.
Well, that's a different question.
I understand.
We don't have an answer. Right now, we're not letting the kids out on the field.
I know.
Right,
How long
and
is that gonna
until
go?
we have some more data, it's gonna stay that way.
Mhm.
And that's a conservative thing, we don't wanna take any
No,
chances and just.
and
Oh,
I have no
better-
problem, it's better safe
Right.
than
Safe
sorry,
than
but
sorry,
would
yep.
someone please just give me a sense
Well,
of,
That's
I
not
would
his
suggest you wanna look past this winter, probably. I mean, winter time's
Thank
coming,
you.
and the kids aren't gonna be playing on the fields,
Okay.
it's a narrow window.
all right?
To suggest that we could get it open and be comfortable
Okay.
in that narrow window might be
Okay.
overly optimistic.
Now, that doesn't.
Thank
Guys,
you,
if
thank
you're in
you.
the
For
public,
the,
just
um,
hold off your
The public,
questions, we'll
we're
get to you
still
guys.
trying to get the scope here. We'll definitely open it up to questions for
Hey.
Concerned parents and.
Wait,
and
the
folks.
I
gro-
also-
the ground's gonna freeze, there's gonna be snow on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
so
we've talked a
winter.
little bit about the idea of maybe, letting them out on the
Winter.
snow.
And in the
but
meantime,
we
we're
don't
working
have
on a
that.
plan to
I
have them
understand,
go out.
I'm sure you will.
We don't have that answer definitively yet.
Well, that was very helpful. Thank you for that. I definitely want to acknowledge Carol Jacobs' efforts in all of this right now as one school committee member, and I'm only speaking for myself. I want to be really very clear about that, but she has done yeoman's work with all of this, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. Again, I'm only speaking for myself, and I've got to say it. It pains me to say this as a professional. For 35 years, I've been designing sites, and this is what I do. And I have been speaking about, how to put it, I guess what I can say is I've lost confidence in site-related design issues on this project. And I need to say that as one member of that committee. And my concern moving forward is, what do we as a town do to protect ourselves from incurring costs that are generated due to whatever you want to call it, omissions, whatever. But it's a question that I want to know how we're going to move forward with it.
Rob, I agree with you, and I appreciate you've been very vocal in your concerns about this project from the start without the proper oversight from the town committees and boards that typically oversight projects like this. I applaud that. What's done is done now. What would you recommend if you were in our shoes as a site planner yourself to provide some sort of oversight?
Well, the first thing I would do, and this is no aspersions on you folks at all, this has nothing to do with you, but I just have no confidence anymore. And I would, first thing I would do is recommend just having a second LSP, send a memo, it's a $500 exercise probably, to just look at what's been done, cursory, and send a memo that, yep, these guys are right on track. That would make me feel a lot better. That's a small step.
Peer overview type of analysis?
Yeah. And again, that's nothing about you folks at all. As far as the rest of the process is concerned, I think two things, and it's two tracks. I think the town needs to deal with how we review and approve town projects. It's a broken system, and we've got to fix it. And we have 2 projects coming up that are public projects. That's got to deal with those. Yep. As far as this project is concerned, I don't know if you're in your shoes. If I'm a site planner at this point, you either pay for another outside group to oversee, look on shoulders, and people start looking at errors and omissions very closely.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, I have my opinion on that. What I would say is this: I have confidence that it's been caught and it will be dealt with properly going forward.
I agree.
I just can't get over the ball was dropped from the beginning. Okay, so it's an oversight, maybe personnel change, somebody dropped the ball, fine. I do have confidence that our OPM and our architects can handle it going forward. It's just a matter of, it was dropped in the first place. Sounds like to me, they don't have much of a choice. The DEP's involved now. They're gonna have to, those plans are gonna have to be submitted and followed, and I'm sure there'd be inspections we're hoping, just assuming that there'll be inspections along the way and everything will be done properly. It's just, for me, the additional cost, because this phase 2 wasn't done in a timely manner, for me, I would recommend to this board that we consult legal counsel on who's gonna pick up the cost of that. Pure and simple, and that's no offense to, I've been working with, with Pat and Chuck and all the people, and Carl, but you know what? We shouldn't bear the cost of that. Period.
Absolutely.
David, just to clarify.
Sorry, if that's unpopular, so what? I said it.
No, it's very popular.
Just to clarify, David, my loss of confidence is not based on one issue. It's based on history, and that's another whole discussion.
Okay, that's fine. And yeah, we've messed up projects before, and we don't want to continue to do that. But anyway, I've said enough.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, if I could.
Mm-hmm.
If you could tell me, when you say there's no imminent danger to children and to the staff, but when you say it's long-term to the faculty that have been there 20-plus years, can you tell me how that is? Is it from the kids tracking in the dirt? Is it?
I'm gonna let Cindy answer that, because we talked to the teachers today, and obviously they had a very similar question, so.
Just to summarize how Mass DEP, the state environmental agency, they make their decisions based on risk. And in doing so, they've adopted levels of risk that are considered acceptable and ones that are not. Anything that is considered not goes into some response action. In this risk-based decision-making system that the state runs, and there are a number of different kinds of assessments. There's long-term risk, which you evaluate what eventually has to get done to the site, but would maybe take 5 years to get done. And another kind is called an imminent hazard, which is looking at, are the conditions such that even exposed for a short period of time, do you have to do something immediately? Is this telling you to work faster than the 5-year project would be? What we found is no imminent hazards. In other words, over a short period of time, neither the students or the workers would be above this acceptable risk level that DEP has defined using their conservative methodology. But over a long period of time, because exposure is related to how long you're exposed, or the risk is related to how long you're exposed, it is possible, conservatively calculated by the methods that DEP has indicated, that the potential risk of cancer, we're talking about a cancer risk here, is slightly elevated above that maximum acceptable level that the state has done. So the risks are just above that acceptable line. We're talking about an increase in a risk of 1.5 in 100,000. If you think about statistics, or you think about a lottery ticket, you buy one, your odds of winning are 1 in 100,000. We're talking about an increase in the risk of getting something of 1.5 to 100,000. So it's not a tremendously large risk, but it is above the cutoff level that DEP decides. And it comes from contact from a couple of different avenues. Certainly any touching of the dirt or materials that have the dirt on them get in their hand, you can absorb through your skin. And the way that happens is all defined by people who have done studies about how things get absorbed into the skin. By touching, getting your dirt in your mouth and swallowing it, usually hand-to-mouth contact. And again, DEP has fairly set assumptions on how that happens and how frequently that happens. And also through inhalation of particles getting into the air and breathing it. How often a worker gets exposed, we were conservatively assuming that it would be 250 days per year. So a lot of the teachers work less than that, or are at the school less than that, but the maintenance workers may not be. So we basically add up all their exposures over some period of time, and it's not until after 20 years of exposure do we see those workers' risks go above that line that DEP has assigned. And it's not indicative of that person getting sick. It is indicative of reaching a point where now the state agency says we need to do something about it. So the risk itself is not a whole lot different than what would be acceptable, just a little bit over the line, but it's a big jump over the line in a regulatory sense. May?
Yeah, what type of legal, what do we have to do for the teachers that have, or the staff that have been there for 20 years that have now moved on,
What about
retired?
the children? I mean, nobody's discussing the children here at all. I've been sitting here for half an hour and nobody's discussed the impact to the children.
Well, we have, because.
Guys, hold on, we're still trying to figure out the impact and get the full story, so we will address the public questions, I promise you. We have a joint committee here, so we're running it tight, and we're asking a lot of questions. So if you guys, I just thank you for your patience.
So can I try to answer Barbie's question? So the first thing we did is we went and looked at the staff lists to
Yep.
find out who currently works at the school, whatever their job, that's worked at the school 20 or more years.
Yep.
And we found 1 teacher and 2 paraprofessionals,
Okay.
of which we've talked individually to each one of those people. Then I went and thought, maybe I should look at the people who have worked there and are now retired, that have been there, had worked there for more than 20 years. And I did find a list, it was 10 people.
Okay.
So I had a conversation with Mike today, because my thought was, you need to call the insurance company. I feel a need to at least inform these people that some testing was done, and we're gonna put together whatever the letter needs to look like, just to let them know about this finding of risk. And Mike, you talked to the insurance company and legal counsel, correct?
Yes.
And would you mind sharing that? Because that, I think, answers Barbie's question.
Well, unless there's any gross negligence on the part of the town, the town is not, there's no liability for the town.
So there's certainly been gross negligence, I think, maybe not on the part of the town, but because we now have the information from phase 1 to phase 2 that was completely, 2 years, so.
Yeah, but they're talking
Phase
20
2
years.
phase 2 didn't find, phase 1 did not find any arsenic.
Right.
Phase 2 did, and we have addressing it, so we're taking a proactive stance on it. We had no identification of any contaminants on the soil there for any reason that we've done anything in the past with. So we're thinking also that this is naturally occurring as a possibility, right? If it's a possibility and it proves that arsenic is naturally occurring in the well, then there is, I gotta imagine there's even less potential to even file some sort of negligence claim on that.
But we may be negligent from this point on if we don't remove teachers that have been there for over 20 years.
I don't
No.
think that
No?
that's necessary, no. I
Okay,
mean,
well, I'd like to see that in writing so that we're covered.
well, I think
An
the
expert's opinion.
important part is to realize that the risk assessment process that identifies this number is really a very conservative system in order to identify what does need to get done and what doesn't need to get done. And if you've reached that threshold, which we have for the, oh dear, just buried that, it's my daughter calling and I couldn't figure out how to turn the phone off. We're on this side that says we have to, that something needs to get
Okay,
done.
I understand.
And in fact, that's what's happening. We're all here today because we're doing what needs to get done. We can notify, as I think that Carol was saying, some of these workers need to put these risks into context with general risks in general with living. And this sometimes makes people angry when I compare this, because it certainly is not a voluntary thing, but the usual, the average risk for a person getting cancer is greater than 1 in 10. So when we're adding, you know, maybe 1.5 in 100,000 to a 1 in 10, it's not really going to add much over the background. It's important that it's a regulatory trigger, that doesn't diminish the fact that it does go
And
over
it's
that.
consistent monitoring going forward so that you can
Yeah,
make
yeah,
sure that
and-
there's no issues.
And again, the assessment methodology is conservative. It's really assuming the high end of how often people contact things, how much they actually eat or breathe or
Right.
dermally. So it's intentionally conservative.
What is that percentage added? What is the percentage added to the 1 in 10?
1.5.
1 point what?
1.5.
1.5.
So 1.5 times 10 to the minus 5.
Yes.
If you guys may just share, so the other contaminants, so we're talking about arsenic, cadmium and chromium on the site, which came up below the levels, but it was a trigger to have you test more.
The chromium ended up not being an issue. When we first analyzed, we analyzed for total chromium. There's two basic forms of chromium, hexavalent and trivalent. Hexavalent is much more toxic, trivalent less so. Because we did total, we assumed it was hex. When we went back and sampled, we speciated it to see which form, and it all ended up being the trivalent, which is the less toxic. So we originally hit a trigger, subsequent analysis showed that the
Rule it
form we
out.
have is not the one of concern.
Ruled it out,
So
okay.
that one drops out.
Okay.
And
the cadmium?
Cadmium, I think we only have a couple of locations
in
that
the
are over
surface.
the trigger level, and when it's averaged out, as you can do legitimately, it's not that. The highest I think we had was 7.6. It was 9. The background level is 2. It's
What
just
is
a little
that?
bit of-
Where does that contaminant typically come from? Is that a naturally occurring
Yes,
as
they
well,
all
quite
are.
often?
They all are.
Okay.
All metals are.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
So can you speak to the history of the site? Because I know you did an analysis, and we tried to give some perspective, but
Can you take that?
Well, it's pretty well outlined in the phase 1. Back in 1960 or 66, thereabouts, it was largely wooded. It had some sparse areas that were exposed out near where the ball fields are now.
I try it, and every time I do, it
And in
jumps back up.
1970, you see the school show up on the aerials. We're looking at aerial maps.
yeah.
And the only thing that's really remained constant is the road that comes in and kind of follows you all the way back and takes you right back into where the leach field is now. That's a constant from 1960 or 66. I just don't remember exactly what the date was. But you just kind of see the evolution of the property. And then in 1970, the school's there. So there's not a lot of history aerial-wise prior to 1966. And that's where some of the speculation in town has come from, which actually is proven to be rather interesting, from a farm to an apple orchard to a guy who remembers playing golf 4 holes or something like that was out there. It's just
Often town research comes down to talking to people who have lived there long enough to
Right.
remember what was there once upon a
Did you guys talk to Gary?
I don't know if this was mentioned before, but there is a known formation of bedrock in Massachusetts that extends from Worcester and it goes up into northeast up into New Hampshire. The school is not specifically on that. It's in a smaller one that may not have been investigated, but that formation is known to have high arsenic.
Okay.
So you are very close to it. It kind of
Close
makes
enough,
sense that
right.
it might be. We may never know for certain what the source is, but
Any
that's feeling more and more like it.
possibility of airborne?
Of airborne deposition?
Yes.
Again, you typically see that higher concentrations at the surface, because
Yeah.
that's where that deposition is
Because-
happening. So if you're going down 2, 4, 6 feet and still seeing it at high concentrations,
See,
and maybe even higher concentrations.
Years ago, we always, like every other town, we burned a dump.
Yep.
And that that type of smoke doesn't rise high. And
Yeah.
as a kid, I always remember going in there, and that's the direction it was basically going.
Right,
But like
right.
you say, I thought that wouldn't have been in the lower levels, except for moving
Correct.
the soil around
Right.
during construction.
Yeah, well,
The 10
that's
the 10 to 12 foot depth, even below the leach field, is a little
Okay.
bit too
pretty
deep.
deep.
For
yeah.
that.
Now, if it's naturally, one question, what's the chances of this getting better or worse if it's naturally occurring and we're building a school there?
Getting, as in, just
We
dissipating
don't know,
on its
correct? It
own?
could
Disrupting
go
the
away,
site.
or it could
No.
get worse in the future.
It doesn't
It's
go
a metal,
away.
it's a metal, it doesn't degrade into anything, it's gonna stay arsenic. Now, there could be some reworking on it, and that's the control that we need to place on any construction that's going on, so we know what's being dug into, and if it's high, that doesn't get moved someplace where it shouldn't be. You
Right.
know, that gets tucked under the new building or under a roadway or something like that, and managed through that.
Mhm.
But it's not gonna turn into gold or anything, it'd be kind of
Gold.
What we sift in that
Alchemy.
pan around
Just
there.
in the interest of time, are there other questions from the school committee at this point?
I just have one. You talked about creating separation and adding more clean fill. Do you reach a point where, even though you've added clean fill, that it gets,
It wears back down.
yeah, that it sort
No,
of
that's
gets
a really valid
contaminated
question.
again over time?
What we do is, we don't just come in and dump fresh dirt on top and call it good. We'll lay down a layer of visible demarcation, so something like the orange silt fence that you see up, around the
Mhm.
site, for instance. You would lay that down flat, then bring clean fill in on top of it, so that if ever your clean fill were eroding or washing out or someplace,
Yeah, you
you
could
would
see
have
that.
this visual indicator that we've gotten down to the point where we need to build that back up.
Plus, there are requirements for maintenance of any added material that we would put on top, where one would have to inspect for the occurrence of erosion and replenish it, so it doesn't just happen and then no one takes care of it. It has to
Right.
be
Yeah, once a
managed
year.
over time
Once a
as
year.
an active.
Would you have
Can I just ask Russ to
monitoring
add-
wells
add one more thing?
continually, permanent monitoring
The question about
wells?
monitoring wells would depend on what we found in
Yeah, okay.
groundwater. If we don't have a groundwater issue, then that
Yeah.
won't be an ongoing concern for us.
We'll probably, we have one well. Spatially, we'll probably put in a few more wells,
To make sure it's
just
not
to,
residual.
sample groundwater in some of the different areas of the site. One thing that Carol just asked me to mention is that the other thing that we were gonna do is propose some type of a wipe sampling program in the school,
Mhm.
because the dust comes in through the windows.
Yeah, swab tests and things.
So we'll run around inside the building,
Okay.
inside the HVAC system, and collect some wipe samples. Now, the school has demonstrated that they have a pretty good monitoring or maintenance program for cleaning that stuff up regularly, but some of the school classrooms rather that are closest to the playgrounds and are a little bit dustier. So we were gonna bring forth a program to kind of swab around and see what we may need a little bit more of a rigorous cleaning program.
Okay. Any other questions from the board right now? I'd like to address the parents as soon as possible so they can.
Pam mentioned earlier the possibility of checking the other fields in town. What is your expert opinion on that?
More and more, we've done a little bit of research. I think there's 5 sites in town that have documented concentrations of arsenic. It becomes like a risk management kind of a decision. Do we wanna, it's a town decision, do we wanna go look at some of the other schools? It's really, would I recommend it? I could probably stand on each side and argue either way. So it really comes down to a risk management. It could be there.
Could be in your backyard,
It
too.
could be in somebody's backyard.
It could be just the nature of the soil
Yeah.
around this whole town and the areas around it. In which case, and then you really start thinking about, well, how do you address it in such a wide fashion? Maybe you deal with it more in terms of understanding that soil shouldn't be tracked in the house and making sure that kids, if they're playing someplace that isn't on bare soil, there may be recommendations across the board for the town if that were the case,
But
it
if
could
your
be.
children are in an area for an extended amount of time, why would you not,
Well,
why would you make a decision not to test those
Well,
areas?
right,
Mhm.
You could be looking at.
Well, you could test every place in town too. I mean,
Well, no,
it's
I'm saying where
Playgrounds
children
in schools.
spend an
playgrounds and-
extended amount of time.
Right.
All right, does the board mind if I have open questions? I have one last, this will take 2 minutes here. Can you just review the time frame between now and the next 60 days of what the events and activities are. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this so we don't keep saying, what's going on, what's going on, what's going on. It will help the public, it'll help me, certainly.
So we're gonna continue with preparation of the health and safety plan, the soil and groundwater management plan, the dust suppression program. We're gonna do a supplemental subsurface investigation
This is next week?
next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, currently scheduled.
Yep.
Where we're gonna collect additional soil samples at different intervals.
Yep.
The plans will be compiled and submitted to DEP.
By,
The IRA plan is due, it'll be 60 days from notification, which is
The 24th, 25th.
At the latest.
At the latest.
Do the testing inside the building in that same time frame?
The testing inside the building, we can schedule, you know, easily within the next week.
so December 15th-ish is when the health
That
and
would be when it would have to go in, the
That's the
IRA,
latest.
that's the due
latest
date
date,
for the IRA plan.
No later than, that goes to DEP.
The
Okay.
goal would be to get it done ahead of time so that if they do wanna see it before they allow us to proceed with construction, that they have it. They
Okay.
could put it on a desk and wait up to 21 days from the time that they.
That you submit it.
Right.
Okay,
Okay, that's assuming you find nothing else.
right.
No,
Well,
no,
It
no.
has nothing to do with
We
it.
submit
No.
that plan
Yeah.
regardless.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The plans, the IRA plan, that's gonna happen.
Okay, so it's gonna contain both the testing that you find next week, if whatever you find or don't find, that will be part of the supplemental plan. Then you got up to 21 days to submit it, I'm sorry, you get till December 15th, which is 60 days. And then the state or DEP could take up to 21 days to respond back to you and say, we accept your plan?
After they've got it.
After
They
they've
take
got
up to
it.
21 days. If they do not respond within the 21 days, then it's
accepted
presumptive
automatically.
approval.
So that's January 7th, 15th, we'll say the 15th, just with holidays and stuff. And then
21 days from when it,
December
if you're
15th.
assuming that it
15th,
gets
right.
submitted on the December
Yeah,
date.
so you're into the new year.
I'm talking,
Okay, I just following this schedule.
all right, so January 15th happens here, you've got a response back from DEP, the plan is acceptable. And then what? And then we have to do what on our end?
Figure
We've
it
gotta,
out.
Well, a lot of it depends on what we find.
I'm just-
There would be another report due 60 days thereafter.
which would
It's a
be,
status report of the plan.
yeah.
The idea being that you've begun to implement the plan, and now you're giving them a status 60 days later from the December.
But during that period of 60 days, between January 15th and that 60 days, there's a potential that we could continue construction at that point while doing the remedial plan, implementing the health and wellness plan.
Yes, and there's a very real potential that the construction could get started long before that.
As soon
2
as
weeks from now.
next week or the weekend.
Okay.
Like within the next 2 weeks would be probably more of a
More realistic.
almost worst case. I don't wanna wait any longer than I have to.
So is it dependent, it's dependent upon when that comes back from DEP?
It depends on DEP's response to us as far as what they want to consider the construction, whether they want to consider it part of the IRA process and require that formal plan to be submitted, or allow us to proceed separately on a verbal approval.
Okay, so there's a tree here, okay?
So we can submit the plan earlier than the December date, and that would be the goal regardless.
So construction will not happen until these plans are accepted by the state?
Or they give us the verbal approval to proceed.
Okay.
And then simply preparing the health and safety plan and the soil groundwater management plan, which may ultimately be
Yeah.
part of the IRA plan. You have the on-site training with
Yep.
the workers.
Right.
And make sure they have the proper credentials and
Yep.
you monitor, and they're
Okay.
going.
Best case is we're working by at the end of this week or
Yep.
next week.
Okay.
That's your best case.
Worst case is mid-December?
Worst case is that 21 days after we submit the plan,
Yeah,
21 days later,
yep. Okay.
we start.
Okay.
Okay, so what's, I like, trying to get an understanding of what's the impact of the project if we start, if we're back in construction in 2 weeks or 2 months. I need to get
What
a
are the
sense.
delay costs at this point, if we're looking at that?
And I know you can't do that yet. You have to wait till the DEP approves the plan.
I would say certainly if we can get going in the next couple of weeks, we're gonna be probably looking at 6 figures, you know, probably $100,000 or something, you know. And again, not knowing what we're gonna have to do with them, I'm hearing, you know, instruction for workers and things, I don't know what that means, but we'd have to stir that into the equation. How much time is that gonna take? How much productivity do they lose? So we need to really know what they're talking about. But certainly from an impact, if we can get going in the next couple of weeks, we have a much better chance of negotiating a more favorable arrangement with the contractor, who's gonna be able to keep his subcontractors intact and keeping them fairly close to the schedule.
So let me ask you this. So these guys are gonna submit a plan to DEP. You'll get a copy of what that plan is?
Yeah, we've asked for a plan so we can get the contractor looking at it, so we can start assessing what his costs are gonna be, and it gives us a chance to jump on negotiations with him.
How quickly would you be able to turn that around to help us get an estimate of what the cost?
Well, again, like I said, if we got something, a draft this week, I would hope a week after that, we would have some idea of impact.
Okay. Can I also get a worst case, you know, best, middle, and worst case scenario? We start a month later, 2 months later, or 3 months later?
Well, I think if you start talking about, you know, 2 or 3 months later, you're talking about substantial costs.
And I need to get expectations set here.
What would be
It's
substantial?
really hard to put a dollar value on it, you know, you'd be talking,
Don't put a
Seven figures.
Don't put a value on it until you take
Yeah.
a look at the plan.
Yeah.
And I just need to get an understand if the DEP says that you can't start this, or for some reason this gets delayed.
Yeah.
We don't start until January 1st,
Yeah.
or February 1st, or March 1st. I just gotta get a sense
I
of.
think what would happen if you said you can't do anything until January 1st, I think what would happen is the contractor's gonna look at it. You really can't do a good job placing fill in frozen conditions.
So,
You can't get compacted.
so you gotta help us.
So he's really talking about effectively moving that starts of March 1st.
And that's what we need to know. What is the impact to us as a community?
7 figures.
1 7 figures or
Yeah.
5 7 figures?
Again, a guess, you wanna guess, $1 million? Yeah.
So you're guessing, but I would like a more scientific guess at this, once you see the remediation
Once we
plan.
get the plan, we can, yeah.
And I just need to know if it doesn't start on this date, if it doesn't start on this date, just help us, what does every month mean to us? That's,
And we're dying to do that with more specificity rather than knee-jerk reaction.
and I don't want you to throw numbers out, I want estimates on that, and I like those as timely as possible.
Yeah.
That would just give us a sense of what is the impact to the community if we have to add another 1 million or 2 million or 3 million on the project, because that's all our cost on the site work. And I can tell you that may delay the entire project because the town hasn't appropriated that money, possibly
Yeah.
in the initial scope of the project. So we're looking at, do we need to go back to town meeting in the spring? I'm just thinking worst case scenario, because that's the kind of my mindset is, what are the unintended consequences? I gotta get a sense of the scope of this.
I think one thing, again, not that I'm looking to, you know, anyway soften the disappointment, and we're all very disappointed in the outlet.
Yeah.
But again, the contractor came in $4 million under the original appropriation. So there is a little bit of room in there to give you a little flexibility. If we were right up against it and we were right on budget, the problem would be more severe.
It didn't soften the blow, but
No,
I
I
understand your point.
Just in
I
case
get your
we
point.
lost any track of that, you know.
It's good to remember while we're looking at the budget.
All right, board, can I bring the audience into this? Gentleman in the far back there,
Not gonna
could you
recognize
state
me,
your, what's that?
Not gonna recognize me, I've been trying to get.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gary has more questions.
That's all right, go ahead.
Well, Gary, quick question. Is it something, I'm just trying to get the parents
And I
addressed
agree,
and out of
I
here
had
so
my
they don't have
hand
to be
out
up all
there
night?
many
I'm sorry,
times,
I
Mr.
didn't see you,
Chair,
so
okay?
I didn't
You looked right
see you,
at me, but
so,
okay.
not putting you out, so please
Just,
go ahead.
I want to more echo what Rob has said about the system being broken. He has come to myself as a selectman, I've sat down with Mike, and I feel pretty confident, I know that he's talked to other selectmen about his concerns with this going forward. And we are just at the beginnings of this, and things appear to be broken. I wouldn't say I've lost confidence in the board or anything, but I would say in partnering with Mass School Building Authority and things that we've seen in the past, I mean, I have no confidence. And in partnering with the state and like over at the library, there's no confidence. And Rob has tried to say, what can we do to fix this going forward? And I think we need to look at that. And I hope that before we walk out of here, we know that when we as a board are gonna revisit it. I think that's what you were trying to get as a timeline, Phil. And I wanna go there. And then parents in the back that are, I will say, and I believe all of the emails, and I have gotten on this so far, and hard paper copies, the concerns have been for the children. This is the first we've really talked, I think, about construction on this, or at least myself. Most of what we've talked, there is a concern for the children. Yes, and you have certainly shown that. Yes, that's right. That was a, and that's, I'm just saying, that's what I've seen here and what's come before us, so.
That's part of the reason we're having trouble answering some of the construction questions, because we don't have.
And the
Y'all
staff,
set?
and the staff also.
That's correct.
You all set? Gary?
Thank you.
Okay. Gentleman in the back, state your name and address, please.
Paul Sadowski, 2 Tall Tree Way. I have so many questions I can't even express. Mr. Surface, I agree with all of you on the board, selectmen, a lot of what you said. I mean, I haven't heard anyone tonight discuss the impact. You have 500 children in that school. I have 2 daughters there, one has asthma. We're talking about dust. You can't use the playground. I mean, are we gonna discuss whether the kids should even be in that school anymore?
Yes.
I mean, you can't just tell me, oh, well, we'll wait till February to let them out to play. The kids are already aggravated now. My kids wanna go outside. It doesn't matter if it's raining.
I'm sorry, Bob, who told you they wouldn't go out to play?
Rob, who's sitting right in front of you, just stated it might wait till there's snow.
After winter.
You
Are you
know,
talking about Russ?
Russ.
Okay, Russ is a consultant,
Both.
so he's telling, I think the question he answered was, what's the, from his vantage point, based on what he knows right now with the tests that have been done, he wouldn't feel comfortable as a consultant lifting the ban on the playgrounds until he had more information.
So
The
are
question
you
was
lifting,
just
are you
directed
lifting
me.
the ban then?
The question you would direct at me,
Okay.
and Dr. Tanner,
Yeah.
is what plan do you have?
Do you have an
to-
alternate
to
recess
figure
plan?
out how the children might be able to go out to play in the interim?
Do you have a
And
plan?
yes, I talked to Dr. Tanner about that today, and the
But we need
parameters.
we need to hear that tonight.
But there's a process here, okay? The teachers met today with the consultants. They were very nice to come out and address them. I thought it was very important that they got information even before the public got it, because they have a direct impact into this, and they have questions about why can't their kids go out. So what we talked about today was that, according to what the consultants have said, there's no risk if it's a grassy area or if it's a paved area. We don't have any grassy areas. So the only thing we can look at is the paved areas. So while I don't have a final plan, one of the things that we talked about today is during the time of 11 to 1:30, which is the window we're talking about, where the children go out for recess, is to the circle in the front and the parking lot on the side. You know, the new parking lot, not the parking lot that the teachers park in. Cordoning off those areas where we can do that with cones and, you know, separation, and then allow the kids to play in that area with people supervising, because they can't get to the fields because they've got the fence. Right, so they would stay within that tarred area potentially, until we find out whether or not, if the ground freezes, which it will, if it snows, which it will, is there a possibility that the kids can play on the field areas as long as they're not exposed to the dirt coming up and having it be dusty?
So what are we looking at for a time frame? A week, a month?
No. Where are we today? We're on Monday, right? I would say definitely by the middle of the week, there'll be a plan that the kids will be out this week.
Now, you've also discussed the school with dust. I mean, I have a daughter who has a bad case of asthma.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a very clean school. I was in it the other day. So, I mean, you're talking about all this remediation, all this stuff going on. We don't even know what's causing the arsenic. So, how are my kids safe in that school right now? I don't get a real warm feeling walking out of here tonight,
Yes.
going home, looking at these kids saying, sure, go down to Pembroke, it's a nice school, play outside, don't worry about what's going on. Because right now, I don't know, you know, do you have a contingency? You know, the Board of Selectmen asked, you know, the minimum of what's going on. You know, what do we do? If things get worse, how do you keep the kids in that school with all this craziness going on around them? Because the quality of life stinks for these kids, if that's the way it's gonna be.
Maybe I can answer some of your concerns about, let's talk about the indoor first.
Yeah.
One of the things that we are going to do, is, as Russ kind of alluded to, was go in and take what they call wipe samples, which is just like a piece of cloth with some hexane on it, wipe, to see if we're finding high levels of arsenic in the dust. It's likely that if there is any in the dust, it's not likely to be much higher than what's in the surface soil outside.
Okay.
And we've determined that for the short-term imminent hazard, there is not one. Those concentrations do not represent an imminent hazard to the children. And even over the full time that they're at school for 5, 6, 7 years, however the grade thing goes, there's not a significant risk for the children. But we're going to test the dust, and if the dust indicates that it needs to be cleaned out of the school, then we'll make recommendations for an appropriate.
But again, where do you put 500 children? It's not like there's another elementary school where you can push a few kids in to other parts of this town. I mean.
Well, there's logistics. We'll clean it
I'm
out.
talking worst case,
I know,
but I mean,
I know.
you know, it just seems like the more I hear about this project, it's almost like the project should just stop. And, I mean, how do you go, I'm just speechless at everything I'm hearing here tonight.
Well, we need to deal with the inside of the school in terms of making sure that it's clean in there, and if something needs to get done, that's fast order to get that done. Outdoor, which you didn't mention about the areas where they maybe play on pavement, but we're also recommending, and in fact they're in the process of doing now, is covering any bare soil areas with mulch. It's not a final solution, but it's quick. We can get that and make sure that with the surface soil, anything that's bare soil is going to have wood chips on top of it, even if it's in an area where the kids can't play. So that way there won't be anything dusted up.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're trying to figure how the kids might contact this stuff and break that pathway as soon as we can. So regardless of what the risk levels calculate out to be, their exposure will be lessened.
Cindy, could you say what you told the teachers today about the degree to which the dust would ever become a risk? Because that, I think the teachers went, oh, okay, that makes a big difference for me. Maybe that would help.
When we look at potential exposure to soil-borne contaminants like arsenic or things that stick to the dirt like it does, people are exposed through a couple of conventional pathways that I alluded to before. Touch it with their hands and it can get absorbed through your skin. You usually, by putting your hands in your mouth and things in your mouth, you end up eating small amounts of soil. And we all do this, and then breathing it. In terms of the importance of these pathways, in terms of what brings about the greatest exposure, inhalation is far below dermal contact and ingestion. It's just a factor of how much dust can get in the air and be breathable. Only a small amount will get in there, so your exposure is really dictated by direct contact for the most part. Dust is down there. We still have to address it, but it's much less. So just having inhalation exposure, cutting off the rest, it's not going to
But you talked about if the hallways were covered.
Right.
Can you say that part?
Oh, I thought I had mentioned that before.
No. Just listen to what she told the teachers.
And I think actually you were the one who said this, but that's okay, that if the levels of the dust, of arsenic in the dust in the school were throughout the school, and they were at the concentrations that were in the soil outside, which makes sense, that's what would get tracked in, it still would not represent an imminent hazard or even a significant risk over the time that they're in the school.
So if we covered the floor with dirt, the dirt from outside at those same concentrations, it still wouldn't pose a significant risk to the kids who are there for their 5 years of school.
And
if that helps you.
Not really. I mean, I appreciate your explanation, but I still don't feel any better about the whole sending my kids to that school tomorrow. I really don't. That's just my feeling, and it's on live TV, or that's the way I feel.
Well, it's understandable.
Thank you for your
Well,
explanation.
Parents and their
I
kids,
appreciate
right?
your
I know how I
explanation.
feel. I don't know who's directing that.
Yes,
Oh.
you're
Joy Bonavita, 7 Bernay Way.
Thanks, Joy.
I have a couple questions. First is regarding the state. So they are contributing approximately $47 million to the project, correct?
About 22 million.
22 million. Okay, so that's the total. Is it tagged to them at this point that this is a project that they are funding regarding the environmental issues?
As in, has the DEP conveyed that information to?
Or does the MSBA know that they're?
Correct, that their potential investment is having this issue.
Well, I think the OPMs have been in touch with the state.
We talked to them as late as today, indicating that there's a discussion going on about resolving the issue.
So that's what we know.
So that money is not at risk?
No.
Based on what they know?
So the money that they've guaranteed coming back to the state, that percentage based on the analysis that they do, that's pretty much in hand.
Okay.
It's only a risk if we don't remediate.
Right, if we don't do the work,
If
then
we
they're
don't
not
do
gonna
the
give us the
work,
money.
then it's a risk.
Of course.
Okay. The second question is regarding, whether or not you guys as a town, how we would go about getting a commitment from you to test at the elementary school, since my children are at Pearl.
And middle and high. Also.
We're, listen, we can discuss that, and I think it's something that,
I think it's
if it
very
would provide
important to
some,
test.
some satisfaction, for you to feel comfortable, or not, depending on what's, we'll certainly look at that.
Would that be a school committee, or would that be the board of selectmen, since it's on our property? I would think it would be something that the school committee would have to say,
It's all
this is
town
what we want
property.
to be done.
It's on town
I know, but
property.
when we
They
talk
manage
about
it.
like
They manage the
turf field,
property.
we
Their
manage-
decision.
It's, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just say this, though. I'm all for, making sure that everything is safe. You're gonna test your own property? Because it could be in your own yard.
I tested it
Once-
for whatever that,
Right. Once you
Chemical
test it,
is.
once you know,
what do you do
DEP
about
is
it?
gonna require you to do the remediation and all. Again, I'm just throwing that out to you. So
Yeah,
we have to
absolutely.
look at it that way too. That
But
we could be testing every single site in town. I don't, again, I've only been here 7 years. There's been people who've been here for a long, long time that may have been exposed to some of the stuff. I remember a town meeting where somebody got up and said it's in the water and you killed my friend. I was mortified. But you know what? Maybe it wasn't too far from the truth. I don't know.
Right, but when it's your own responsibility, under my home, we had the radon test, it came back positive, and I paid the $5,000 to get it clean, I mean, that's,
But I'm not so
but
sure
as
soil
a
testing
public
is
area
mainstream.
where my children are, I need to know from the town that they are safe. If not, I make the decision to move out of the town.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't disagree with that.
Well, we just gotta assess the risk of the cost, and, they can't say yes or no, they'll have to figure out what the costs are to do that, and the risks that are potentially out there, make a decision on that, and let the school committee deliberate on that, and you guys go to the school committee and advocate on the behalf of what you wanna have done. Okay.
And one more question, just over to you. So you've been in this industry a long time. Clearly, we're very concerned about our children, as you can imagine.
Of course.
Are they considering in their calculations that it's not just breathing in? These kids play flag football. They eat half the field on a Friday night. I'm not kidding. So,
There's a
they're
number.
considering that amount of intake when you're saying skin to mouth and everything else.
The numbers that DEP recommends you use for these kinds of exposures are on the high end of what they know to be the distribution. They do studies on how kids contact soil and how much they get in, and the numbers that DEP recommends that you use to assess this is always kind of on the high end, so it's what we refer to as a conservative assessment. It tends to overestimate the typical exposure.
Literally, there's a number for how much dirt a kiddo eats on a given day.
And
To
develop-
answer your question very directly, there is a number of grams of soil that a typical kiddo eats on a day where they're hustling around in the dirt with their friends. So that is
Yes,
representative.
and those numbers don't necessarily come from the DEP, they're usually done by university professors that are doing studies, independent people who come up and do this as science research. And they're fairly well ingrained. I mean, EPA has accepted them, DEP basically took them from EPA, and they've held up well over time in terms of people not challenging that they were not conservative enough or not reflective enough of people's potential contact.
And it did come out that they were conservative enough.
Yes.
Yeah, typically what they do is they, take the studies, come up with a number that the studies point to, and then they do a tenfold number off of that. So they add this tenfold layer
some
of
cases they-
conservativeness
Yeah.
to the numbers that then we use to do these calculations.
Just to give you an idea of the conservative nature of how much soil sticks to one's hand, what they did, they took a lot of this, they took it from a lot of studies, but the primary study that they took it for, there were kids playing in wet mud, and the kids had it all over them, and then they measured per square centimeter of skin how much mud stuck to them. Mud sticks a whole lot more than dry soil, so they take that kind of a conservative approach to come up with, okay, then we're gonna say that this is a number that's a conservative number, a protective number to use when you put it into your number crunching into your
And then
risk
we're gonna give
assessment.
that kid a sandwich made with Wonder Bread and figure out how much,
They just put
goes
on the
in the
sandwich
mouth.
and then eats.
Or, the kid sits with the finger in the mouth like they always
Right,
do.
Right, okay, thank you.
So if I can just simply state, if my daughter was playing on softball on that field for 10 years, half a year, every year, and the dirt's on her hand from the softball, somehow ingested, you're telling us that it's not a risk high enough that would that we would have to worry about.
It's not one that would trigger a regulatory action because of the short period of time that a person is at that school, that a kid is at that school. That's why the workers are the ones that end up showing more of a risk over the level because they're there for a longer period of time. It's time dependent. The longer you're there, the more you might incur a risk.
Some of the high school kids are still on that field.
Well, yes.
Eighth grade is pretty bad.
Intermittently.
Football on that field.
Intermittently, they may not be there. For the children in school, we assume they had contact with the soil 180 days per year because that's how long the school period is for most.
But you're not
usually
counting the weekends. They play sports on the weekends there. There's track there. They go up there with their friends. They're there more than 180 days. Are you saying you two are comfortable sending, if you had kids 2nd through 5th grade, you'd send them there with no problem?
I would be concerned, and I would make sure that I implemented things in my home that would reduce their contact with them. Hand washing, and I mentioned this at the meeting today, is always very important anytime you have any kind of soil-based contamination. Teach kids not to put things in their mouth. I mean, you always want to do that because you never know what's in soil anywhere.
Okay,
frankly.
well, I have a 15-year-old. He's been through 2nd grade at that school. He continuously goes there on the weekends for his 6-year-old brother, who is a 1st grader, who will be at that school next year, who has spent since he was 6 months old there because we've been, when Kyle went there, he obviously came as a family. So now you're talking these kids have been exposed to these fields more than the 2nd through 5th grade year. You're talking years and years and years. Plus myself, I've been in town 9 years. He was in 2nd grade, started sports immediately on that field. So for 9 years, I've been sitting on that field, breathing the dust, playing in the sand, playing in the dirt, and you're still saying it's safe. So I have a 5-year-old, I have a 6-year-old, so I'm saying I'm still going to be there another 5 years.
But you have to understand, we're looking at different receptors that may have different outcomes, but we're not saying it's safe, which is why we need to go and do it. It may be the workers that are triggering it, but we've still recognized that the exposure is occurring. That's why they're not playing in the fields anymore. If we were taking the position that, well, it's okay for the kids, we'll let them play out there. The numbers will give you some information, but that's why we're preventing that
What are
exposure.
the actual numbers? I mean, for those amongst us, I'm not one, but friends of ours who are chemists, what are the actual levels that we found? Is that going to be put online? We would really like to look at this so we can compare.
We actually expect to have
Can
what
you
is
give us a
referred
proper
to.
number tonight at the arsenic level as well as the cadmium level? Because those two elements together, from what you read out online, might work against the health issues or actually pose stronger health risks if they
Just
come
having
together.
a concentration isn't going to tell you much about it because it really does depend on how much you're exposed. We are putting what's referred to as the imminent hazard assessment. I'm anticipating having a final at least to the town by the
What
end of
are
this
the
week.
preliminary numbers at this point of the arsenic level at these sites, at the baseball field, at the basketball field, at the playground, of all our kids who've been there for a long period of time? Because you tell me you're concerned, I'm concerned as well. What are the symptoms? Do we have any? Are we going to assess symptoms that the school nurse might have at Pembroke? Headaches, motor sensory issues. We're talking about cancer, which is the worst, of course. The kidneys to the lungs, actually the liver, the lungs would be the ones that are most affected, as well as the skin. We have issues. I mean, there's definitely people with skin cancer or liver cancers or whatsoever. Are we going to look at what the nurse has to say at Pembroke about these issues? I know from my own experience, our son went to Pembroke, all of a sudden he starts having headaches. And there were several people that have headaches, but I have no idea how to compare this in relation to other families, because I don't know. The nurse at Pembroke probably would have a good hold of this. The levels are high, and you talk about concentration and everything else. The levels might be behind my backyard too, which we'll probably test as well. I have a call into the pediatrician already to check urine samples for my kids to see where they are with their concentration.
and
maybe hair and nails as well,
and
which
I
have the
understand,
long-term
and
exposure
you
on
could do that.
arsenic, which is a really serious issue. The other question I would have is, why are we looking at possibly taking the kids out of there? It has been very dry. We have definitely higher dust levels in the air at this point. So are we really looking at Plan B to get the kids out of the site if we continue with our construction? The third question I have is, what prompted the tests on October 15th? Was it the PANC checking off something, or what was the test reason for October 15th? That would be a question to you, the oversight project manager, is that correct? What was the reason for this?
We had prepared the phase 1 initial site investigation. We
Oh,
had
we got that far,
identified
yes.
the recognized environmental conditions. The recognized environmental conditions dictated a certain assessment-related scope of work.
Could
we
we just have
implement.
just a simple refraining, just a simple answer to my question? 2011, we did number one. That was very clear. Mr. Surface brought this issue to speak at the beginning of the meeting for this particular issue. What prompted us to do the October 15th testing around the two sites? What was the reason for doing those specific tests at that time?
Because of what we had identified in the phase one as the environmental
2 years
condition.
prior?
Yes.
So we just decided we're
The
going to do on October
transformer.
15th, we now continue, we're going to step into where our tests of 2011 were. We're going to step in. So
Elizabeth,
where is the
we covered this
responsibility?
part of it in the beginning of the meeting.
Right, but
So we'd like to,
I totally get this, but the thing is, besides the fact that we are now very worried about the health of our children, these are young kids at the Pembroke site. The other schools are, I don't know how, well, Pauli is much older, but the middle and high school is another issue as well. These sites, I mean, they were all built roughly in about the same time frame, I believe. I'm not sure, I didn't check that. So, besides the fact that we are now really concerned about the health issue, not just the kids, also of the staff, all of them there, but clearly first our kids. But the other question too is now, is our financial situation. We're going to have a big tax coming onto us because of the school. We clearly supported it. Many of us did, so we. But now we're looking at the legality of this. Whoever dropped the ball on the oversight project management issue, this thing should have come up way earlier before we even start committing to projects, lining up people, signing contracts, having all kinds of sites issue now that we need to clear out dirt, God knows what else. So it's going to be very expensive to clean all this or to continue and such. So we have several issues here. We are having the health issue and we have the responsibility issue, the legal issue and the financial side of this. But my question still goes in as far as having young kids exposed to all these measures that the state puts out, and I certainly trust that they are on a conservative side, possibly, but there are also sides and also studies that show that young kids react to these elements much more sensitively than a grown-up would do. And I'm sure that's
You're right.
taken into
You're
consideration,
absolutely right.
but still, I mean, really,
Yeah,
this is a
those-
very, very serious issue.
Well,
And like
I
she
agree.
says, all of us have been at these fields all the time for flag football, for basketball, for God knows what else, all the time, in the
And
winter
the town
time, in
just
the
invested
summertime.
putting lighting
Yes.
in
Yes.
recently. Within the last 2 years, they put lights on the field so the kids would have more options on fields to play their sports.
So-
So you're saying 2 years ago you guys got this report and then you went in and put electricity and everything else and the kids are
That's
still.
one of
the first report was not anything to do with bore testing or anything like that. The contamination was discovered on this last test, or this most recent test, which is October 15th.
Okay.
So, Carol,
Yes.
hold on,
But excuse me, I just want to make sure I get a level from this lady right now about the arsenic level. I really would like to know what is the current preliminary arsenic level of the site?
When you're saying level, what are you talking about?
Range is not
Inorganic
one,
arsenic,
concentration is not one.
whatever the highest concentration. What's the average high concentration that
Well,
we
the
have there?
highest concentration is down at depth and is not being contacted
All
by
right,
anyone.
Elizabeth,
Not
hold
soil
on.
depths, the concentration of the element, of the inorganic arsenic.
Elizabeth, hold on. Russ, what's your
The-
recommendation?
We're gonna finalize a technical document, it's gonna go through the whole quality control process, and we'll post the document. Should be done by the end of the week. That's when the information will be available, because it'll have gone through the review process, the laboratory will have done their quality control. We'll be confident that the information that's published is accurate and available. If we start throwing around numbers now, those numbers may not be accurate, and those numbers by themselves don't mean as much as they do when they're compared with the various circumstances about the intensity and the frequency and the age, and there's lots of variables. So for me to tell you that the number is X, that doesn't necessarily mean anything when you don't account for the variables that go with it.
Where will that be
So
posted?
we'll have that document finalized, and
I've been posting everything on the district website.
right, we'll make that stuff will be public record. Anything that goes to the DEP, it is a public record, and that information will be not only available on the DEP website, but we're talking about figuring out how to make it even more accessible.
Will we have a look at what the school nurse has collected as far as information, maybe along with symptoms possible of a high arsenic as well, along with cadmium exposure? Can we have a look at
I'm
this?
not sure how you do that, Elizabeth.
I'm not sure either, but I'm sure there are people that can help figuring that out.
But listen,
Sure.
let them, they are gonna test the interior of the
Yeah.
school. So let's look at that first before we take it to the next step and look at historical analysis that the nurse has done. in order to really get
The nurse won't
any
be able
type.
to make the
Yeah, I don't
connection.
know if the nurse has been keeping that, what records and how you can really analyze that scientifically to make some type of conclusion. Let them test the interior of the school. Let's see what this testing comes back. You're gonna do the swabs, like you said, right? So let's look at that first before we jump ahead.
Will there be a
We're all
medical-
concerned about the kids. We're all concerned about the kids' safety, the staff's safety. We're concerned about the cost. We want to, we want to know who's responsible for the delay. All those things. A lot of that's been addressed tonight. Let's take a step back.
Right.
Let's not panic. The fields are closed for now. We're taking, the utmost care and precautions here. Close them. Let them do the interior of the test of the school by next week. By the end of this week, we'll have more information. And Carol, I think, is going to do a public forum.
Yeah, I'm gonna, on Wednesday night, I think, was when Russ was able to come on out, so on Wednesday night, we'll have.
Which Wednesday?
Not this Wednesday, sorry, I
Next
don't wanna
Wednesday.
confuse.
Next Wednesday.
A week from Wednesday, cause this
The
week they
13th.
weren't available.
Okay.
So, the 13th, that's right, on the 13th, and then we'll do it at the middle high school auditorium. And anybody who wants to come can come, from the public, any parent. These guys will be there, and we'll do this all over again, but people will have an opportunity to ask questions. We may actually even have some more information at that point with which to share.
Carol, what
Carol.
time?
6:30. 6:30.
Carol, is
Okay.
it possible to send that out through, like you did it
I
last?
will, I will.
I'm not just saying on, like, you've been posting it on the
I'll
school
put it on the
website.
Connect Ed.
But I was saying, can you send that out to like everybody
Yeah,
through
do-
Connect Ed?
I will, I
Robocall,
will do that.
yeah.
Carol, it would be great if we could get a
Townwide.
state public health official to join, because you're gonna get a lot of questions regarding health at this meeting.
That's a good suggestion.
We can work on that.
Okay. Yeah.
We can speak with the police chief to do it townwide too.
Yeah,
Townwide.
we'll get the word out, we'll definitely get the word out.
Because there's a lot of people who didn't even know
I
about
know,
this
and
meeting.
I knew tonight wasn't gonna be a forum that was gonna necessarily cover that, that's why I think I suggested to anybody who'd listen to me that a community forum is in order. So I'm happy to hear that you're substantiating that it makes sense to do it. And I think that's gonna help a lot, if we can, and I think we should ask Charlie from the cable to tape it as well, for people who aren't able to come.
You had a question? Your name? and-
Kathy Hogan, 8 Hawkway. I'm just wondering, if the school was not partially funded by the state, would we ever have gotten to this point? Would we ever have known this was going on? Like, is
Yes,
there a
yes.
standard for
Yes.
digging and testing?
Yes.
So even
Oh, that's required.
Yeah, we
all
would
of
have
that is
known.
required because it's a,
We may have known earlier, but we would have known. Yes.
For us to get financing for any project, whether it's state
have to board
help or
test.
not, we have gotta have a clean environmental assessment on the property prior
okay,
to
so
us
when
getting funding.
say new subdivisions go in.
Oh yeah.
All of it
absolutely.
gets
Same
done.
thing.
All of it.
They do.
Okay, so
You
it's a
won't get
little bizarre.
financing.
I mean, there was tons of building in Georgetown since 1996 when I moved here.
Yep.
It's bizarre that we haven't come across this at any other sites in town.
The bank requires an ASTM phase 1, which looks at the history. The purpose of it is, do you see anything in the history of this property that gives you cause for concern? Is there something that suggests an environmental problem here? If there isn't,
Then you don't go any
then you
further.
don't go into the ground.
Okay, so that's why, okay.
Yeah. So it's very possible they did those tests, didn't see anything
Right.
that triggered concern, and never took a
Went any
soil
further.
sample.
Our issue is that we should have done this prior, several months back,
Yeah.
Several months.
which would have came up with the same results, and then we'd be in the same situation. The only caveat to that now is that we've got a school project starting, and that's a major issue for the town.
Right.
And in terms of the history, if you think about where we are today, documenting all this now, for people that want to build something down 20 years down the road in that area, this is going to come up and generate more protocols to be tested. So to your answer is, it's about history, you know?
And
We're
we-
creating some history now for people
Well,
later
sure.
to build.
Someone's gonna do it.
Right.
We would never, at this point, you guys tell me, but we would never say, forget it, we're not doing it.
I don't
On
know.
this site.
That's why I'm so upset. That's why you got
I mean,
right
I
to the
understand
point.
the timeline
I'm
here.
very upset. That's why
But-
I'm very upset.
Would it ever come to that? Do you think that would ever come to a point where the town would decide that, you know what, I don't wanna risk it, I don't wanna do it on this property?
Yes, there would. And it would be, if the cost of this remediation, and time, energy, and money is great enough, that would put the project in jeopardy with the existing funding that's been approved for it. And we had to go back to town meeting to vote for supplemental funds, the town could say no.
Right.
Exactly.
And then,
The state would say, but.
We would start the process
All over
all
again.
over again. Like
Not
We
only
go
that,
back in the pool.
not only that, the state would make us remediate what, once you know.
That has to be
it
done
can be fixed.
irrespective of, the,
Right.
the environmental
Don't worry
cleanup has to be
about it.
done irrespective of the school, right?
Right. Okay.
All right, with that, I'm gonna move this meeting along for the other stuff that we have for the Board of Selectmen this evening. We appreciate all of you coming out tonight and your concerns, which is, want you to understand, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of moving parts right now. We don't have the whole picture. That's what we're working on. We'll have the whole picture in the next week and a half, 2 weeks at most likely at the very latest. We're making things happen as quickly as we can. We are concerned about the children, we're concerned about the employees in the school system, and it's a matter of time for us to work through the details and actually get the data back and be able to understand where we are. So next Wednesday,
Not
the
this Wednesday,
13th, at 6:30, there at the Georgetown Middle High School auditorium, there will be a public forum. Hopefully we can get a health official from the state of Massachusetts, and our consultants here will be here. The school committee members will be there. I'm sure some of the Board of Selectmen will be there. Ms. Jacobs and company will be there. So that would be a great time and place to bring questions, and certainly look forward to seeing people there. At this point, I'm just going to move this our agenda along on our regular agenda for this evening, because we still have some business to attend to. And I thank you all for coming out and your concerns. And
So the school committee will close its
you
meeting
could
as of
definitely
now?
close it. And
Before you do that,
see
Mr.
you
Chairman,
soon.
make a motion, we have a 5-minute recess.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're back from recess, so we will continue our meeting here. We have completed the Pembroke Elementary School update. Veterans Day proclamation is next. Doug, would you like to come up and talk to us? Lost all my papers here.
Just state your name for the record.
Doug Dawes, 4 Dodge Avenue, Georgetown, commander of the Renee J. Gagnon American Legion Post number 211.
Welcome.
Oh, yeah. Okay, what I'd like to do is, you all have a letter that I sent into the town hall inviting the selectmen and the community to attend Veterans Day on Monday, the 11th, at 11 o'clock, Harry Murch Park. I would also like to invite all the veterans of the community to assemble with us between 10:30 and 10:45 at the town park and ride and march to Harry Murch Park. After the ceremonies, there'll be refreshments at the VFW Hall on Andover Street.
Very good.
Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Be there.
Appreciate it.
To it.
All right, so we'll entertain a motion
Chair, I
to
move that we
observe
accept
Veterans
the
Day.
proclamation to observe Veterans Day on November 11th, 2013.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, and we can sign that and send that around if we would. Community tree lighting at New Life. So there is a community tree lighting on Sunday, December 8th at the New Life Community Church. That's 186 Main Street, and that starts at 6 p.m. And they will be doing singing of Christmas songs, carols, and a brief repose of readings and singing in the worship center and refreshments in the fellowship hall. And so the public is invited to attend that. And is there anything else we need to do on that?
They're asking if they'd like to hold this as a community tree lighting. So they're asking the townspeople so that they can advertise it as a community tree, because we no longer have a Christmas tree because Harry Murchman was cut down and the front was cut down. So.
Well, we have a new one.
We replanted the Christmas
We have a new one, just so everybody knows. It's only about 6 feet high, but it's been planted. It is the Charlie Brown tree right now. It's the town tree, and it has been planted right between Johnny's and Napa. There's a little wedge of land that we have there, and the tree is there. Now,
Chair, I don't see any action here.
I don't see any action
All the
either,
other
other than-
nonprofit and other public, or other nonprofit or other organizations, I don't even don't consider them as nonprofits, such as the GAA, have community parades and community this and that. They're welcome to, I would say that
It's
they're
on their
welcome to
property.
use what they want to call as community, because it is. It doesn't mean it's specifically endorsed by the Board of Selectmen or the town of Georgetown, or it doesn't mean it's not endorsed.
Right.
We're glad to see it happen.
Right. Mike, any issues there? No issues? Concerns?
No,
Any
I mean,
actions?
we're not designated it as an official town tree lighting.
Right.
We don't want to do that.
No, this is a little bit of, I'd fight for it, but I think the lawyers would be here pretty quickly.
We used to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
So I don't think there's any action, Mr. Chair.
All right.
So let's repeat that. That's December 8th at 6 p.m.
Yes, a community, New Life Community Church.
186 East Main Street. Beautiful.
So next, holiday schedule town hall. So, gentlemen, review this, and if there's any questions or comments, Thursday, December 26th, could be used as a floating holiday because Friday, November 29th, town offices are closed.
The question is, what do you want to do for Thursday, December 26th?
So in the past, Mr. Chair, we've always asked just for guidance from the town administrator to run his building the way that he wants to run the building. Is this what you were proposing, Mike?
Well, the staff has been asking
What we're doing.
what we're doing so they can make plans for the holidays. And it would be my recommendation that we use the floating holiday that they earn, and they have to use it within X amount of days, and just say that Thursday, December 26th is going to be the floating holiday. And, you know, it would necessitate the town hall being closed, you know, Wednesday and Thursday, and reopening actually on,
The second.
on Monday.
Monday,
Yeah, Monday.
Oh, I'm
Monday,
sorry,
December
right, I'm sorry, the
29th.
29th.
Yeah, Monday
right.
the 29th.
That's fine.
We'd have regular hours then on
Tuesday.
on New Year's Eve, close New Year's Day, and open the day after New Year's.
Okay. Any discussion?
Makes
Well,
sense to me.
it's a floating holiday, and if we designate it to be a certain date and someone else is planning on using it, where do we stand then, I guess? Do we just say this is what we would like and hope that most everybody abides?
Well, I think we've done it in the past.
Well, I know there was some confusion over it last year.
That was only because people were taking vacation days at that time.
We opened last year. We didn't close for
Correct.
Yeah, I
Right.
remember that.
Right.
I mean, if all the staff is okay with it, I see no problem, I just.
Well,
What's the consensus from the staff?
Janet's been hearing from most of them.
I mean, most, sure, but either if we don't close, there will be a lot of people taking the day off. So the people will use the floating holiday either way, or vacation
else,
time,
right.
or something else, so.
So
The
town
town
hall
hall
could be
would-
open, but no offices could be open, except for
That-
one or two.
a lot
Yeah,
of
Which
it
is
would
worse
be-
than
will be
even,
closed.
which is worse than even opening it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's why I recommend that we
So do we need to
close.
take a vote on
Everybody
it?
close.
Do we need to vote on it, or no, this is just informational at this point?
Just No, you don't have to vote on it, just give me your consensus opinion to close the town hall on the 26th.
So, gentlemen,
Works for me.
works for me.
My attitude has been, that's up to you, Mike.
Right.
It's
Gary?
always been my attitude.
Up to Mike.
Okay. It's up to you, Mike. Have fun.
Closed on the 26th.
Okay, moving right along. Declaration of surplus property.
Chair, I move that we approve the declaration of surplus personal property from the town administrator, which includes law books in the Selectmen Town Administrator's office at no particular value, unknown particular value.
Books have not been updated for 4 years. All the information available online.
Make a motion, second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Gary, opposed?
He wants those law books.
You can- All right, appointments. So we're appointing all of these folks to the Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee, correct, Mike?
Yes, we're required, well, with the help of Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, we have to rewrite our hazard mitigation plan, and we need a formal committee to do so.
Okay. So we're forming this?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you guys be involved in the mitigation planning for the school?
The school
Would you have jurisdiction on that?
Not that I'm aware of, not at this point.
Okay.
These are well, this is natural hazard mitigation. There's another hazard, safety mitigation committee that's headed by the police chief. And that's a separate plan.
Okay.
This is an environmental plan.
Or his is a response committee, or yours is a planning committee. Is that how I see the differentiated?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well,
Entertain a motion.
it's an interesting perspective to see if they can assist us in some governance on the mitigation plan that we're gonna get from LSP. I'm just throwing that out there. It's something to think about. Do we want, if that's their charter, do they have any jurisdiction into that? And it's not so much them coming up with a plan of remediation, but maybe someone that will follow the execution and be an oversight committee?
This is related to FEMA. We're required to have this plan so we can apply for FEMA mitigation.
Not you
grant.
guys, the actual response committee, the safety.
Oh, the safety committee?
Think about it. I don't need an answer right now, but if it's an oversight committee that's chartered with something like that, and if that's what their charter is, then I want them involved in it.
Yeah, I'll look into it, but I don't think so. They look at weather-related and
Okay. I don't know.
mass casualties.
I don't know their
things like
charter. I see hazard mitigation, I think of
Past 2 hours.
hazards. Environmental hazards, ecological hazards, et cetera, et cetera.
Naturally occurring acid.
Yeah. Arsenic.
All right.
Not
Mr.
to-
Chair,
not to
I
make-
move that we appoint the following to the Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee. Michael Farrell, Town Administrator. Deb Rogers, Board of Health. Howard Snyder, Planner. Steve Brzezinski, Concom. Donald Cudmore, Police Chief. Al Beardsley, Fire Chief. Peter Durkee, Highway Surveyor. Dave Schofield, Light Department. Lou Mamelette, Water Department, with terms to expire all on June 30th, 2014.
I have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, team.
Any other discussions? Mike, do you have anything?
No, I don't.
We're gonna put off the financial review for our next meeting. We will continue that. I still, going back to this topic, if we can we spend a few minutes on this? school topic that we were talking about today? I don't know about you guys, but, you know, I'm deeply disappointed, concerned, and wondering about why it took that long for us to be able to get the second study done, especially when we're doing a study and we're right up against the time of breaking ground and now experiencing delays. I didn't really hear much of an answer out of our OPM. Did anybody else hear an answer, or did I miss it?
I heard they scrambled. When I heard they scrambled, that means they're behind.
Right. But our first one was done in what, December of 11, they said? And then it's good for 180 days, and I would have thought we would have had a second test, the second phase after that, or somewhere along that lines. Is that not the
If I
best
may,
practices?
Would the second phase should have been done before we voted on it, or after, prior to construction? I mean, if the town had voted not to go forward. So that's one question that came to my mind. What would they typically, or would the town have wanted to know that?
The committee may not even have brought it to the town.
Well, that's it. Just
That was
it.
my
So, I mean,
point.
But I don't know what is typical. It sounded to me like it's typical that it's not done until construction. And
Typically,
when
there's
you're borrowing the money.
Typically, there's an oversight committee, such as the planning board, or conservation, or any of those other committees that this would normally go through.
Which we
And,
know
it
short-circuited.
would have checked the box
Right.
that an environmental assessment was done. What we're getting into, just be careful, we're getting some stuff that we're speculating we don't have the
Oh, I
answers
know.
to. But I agree with your assessment is that this, and we all agree that we've hired these OPMs, this architectural engineering services firm, and designer. I'm disappointed isn't the word, and you know, the question goes to, great, do we have legal recourse for any damages? And I think that we need to investigate that if we have some significant damages, which significant costs that incur on that. And,
Yeah.
I am looking
into
into
that.
our legal
Absolutely positively.
issues.
And the insurance?
I've already talked with insurance, and until we have a loss,
Right.
and they can't, there's no pollution coverage.
Okay.
We don't have that, especially if it's gonna be natural occurring, but there's a liability issue when things should have been done or could have been done, and that's being reviewed
Okay.
by legal counsel.
All right. Yeah, I think to your point, Gary, you know, once it was passed at town meeting, then I would have thought we would have had that. And I know.
I was on that
I
committee.
know when you were on
I
the-
would have, if again, if we had got the timely phase two in a timely manner, then I definitely would have reconsidered where we were putting the school and looked for other options. Again, if it was a major issue, we wouldn't have known the scope. We don't know what the scope and what the remediation costs are going to be. So, I don't want to speculate. However, I know that, my attitude might have been a little bit different about where we were going to put the school.
yeah, I don't think that would have happened. I think what normally should have happened here is that you're not going to do a phase two environmental study unless you're sure you're going to do the project, and you're not going to do the project unless you're sure you have an environmental study done.
Right.
So typically, you've got to get the go-ahead that this is going to this project is going to go forward, and then you make the investment to complete the environmental, and then you sign off and saying, I'm committed to moving forward and getting the finances. So I think the order is the right way that they did it. It's as simple to me is that they're 6 months behind in doing that phase two. Even if they didn't believe that there was anything on that property, but there was a order to do a phase two assessment on that, that should have been done 6 months ago, at a minimum 6 months ago, and that's why we're in the predicament that we're in.
Right.
I just.
However, if that was done, we would have halted, again, we may have halted some of the design phase in all this, which they accumulated fees and got paid to do.
Right.
So that's the thing it's just, again, I already expressed my deep concern and my disappointment over all this, but you know, we are where we are. We'll see what, you know, let's see what the additional testing is, and we'll see what the remediation cost is, and see what our legal recourse is. That's all.
Yeah, I think we need to know, should the phase 2 been done in the feasibility study phase or in the design phase? I think they waited.
They were waiting for
definitely until
design.
design because of the funding issue. It's like getting the cart before the horse. You have to have the approval of the funding so they can go out and spend the money
Right.
To do the testing.
to do the testing. But, you know, in reality, it was probably better to do it in the to see if it's feasible to put it there. That's why that's why they call it feasibility study. But I don't know, and I'll confirm that.
Okay.
We did a lot of soil samples to see if they could build the school where they built it. Now, this was not testing for metals, I take it. This was just testing for lead, the ledge, and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was geologic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, geological, not.
Well, are we going to keep this on our agenda for at least once a month, I would say, that if you've got information, I would take it that we'll definitely revisit it at our next meeting. But I would suggest that if looking at the time frame, as Phil was saying, I would like to at least see it on our agenda once a month. If there's nothing to report, we would still revisit it.
Every 2 weeks this needs
Yeah,
to be
this needs to be on every agenda. I'm gonna be, pending I don't have any crazy schedule next week, I'm gonna be at that meeting on Wednesday, so any other board members?
I'm in Vegas for business.
I'm gonna try my best. Have a family issue, but
Okay.
we'll see.
Yeah, you know, if you wanna go or.
Yeah, I'll try to get there.
It'd be good, but I definitely wanna go and hear and see what's going on, so if, my schedule permits, I will absolutely be there. And then,
You need to
we
get
can, get the follow-ups from.
If 3 people are going, you want us to post a meeting?
Well, yeah, it's probably safer.
Why don't you just do that just in case? And if you do have 3 people, just open up, because I'm
Okay.
sure some of the questions will be directed to you
Yeah,
guys.
no, and that's why I ask if anybody's going
I
or
will.
planning on going.
Most likely I'll be
You-
there.
You would be there, okay. So, yeah, let's plan on that, posting a meeting, just as a precaution, and if there's 3 of us there, then we will make sure that we address Carol before the meeting and open up.
Would you see also that it's televised, or at least recorded and then put on the cable channel?
Yeah. Yeah.
They can run on cable.
In terms of once we get results and everything, you know, on the district site's fine as well, but I think it should be on our site as well, you know, the town site.
School building committee site.
Yeah. It's gotta be prominently somewhere on the front page of this town site, I would say.
Just put a link on our website, our town website.
Yeah. You know, where you put the announcements in the top right corner at least, and if it's living on the school building page, that's fine, but just so that, you know, our residents and folks can find it.
Save me phone calls coming to me, where is it?
Mhm. Anything else, gentlemen? All right, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn for the evening.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
You guys gotta sign this here.